Now, let's open our imaginations and begin. The Witness by Violet Hunt. Part 1. I was sitting over my fire in my hut in Benanga Creek, Wyoming, when the idea came to me, weakly, dreamily at first, but later on strongly and vividly, that I must go home. It was, as I confusedly made it, 7 years since I left Europe. I felt the thing that had driven me forth less keenly, and I realized that in 7 years things must have quieted down a bit. Sally, too, being of a cheerful, easy-going make, would have forgotten what had happened on that one night, since in the nature of the case there could have been no discovery, no scandal. No one could have known anything about it. No one had witnessed her act except Roger, my dog, who now lay so quietly, numb with advancing age, between my feet in front of the fire. Roger had been only a year old on that short summer night, a clumsy, flopping puppy that followed me unsteadily, swaggering from side to side down the garden path of the old haunted manor house where Sally James lived. It was flagged with broad white stones, and the gate of it opened straight onto the road that led to Durham, to Darlington, and to the other ends of the earth, where I am now. I ran away, like a coward. And not yet a coward, for I loved Sally James, and I knew too much. I turned at the gate, and I gazed back at the windows of the house with their close-drawn blinds. I thought they looked like eyelids let down over anxious dreams. I saw the one window in the oldest part of the house where Sally, half-dressed, was peeping through the blind, annoyed, yet uncomplaining at my departure. She knew men. She thought I was just going to put my head under the pump and freshen my aching brain and my eyes that had looked on so much since they closed in sleep the night before. Then, after a walk over the common with my dog at my heels, I should return to her, stay with her through the long years to come, and profit by her crime. She had rid me of a nuisance. She didn't realize, how could she, being hard Sally James, that I couldn't bear the thought of seeing her face again. She was so careless of other people's feelings that she knew less of what I felt than the silly young dog who slunk at my heels, or the pert robin that perched on the cheek of the gatepost. The robin, with its head on one side, seemed to stare at me and leer horribly as I closed the gate behind me and went out into the world forever. I never meant to see Sally again. I never meant to write or receive a letter. I never meant to look at a newspaper again. I never meant to know if she were tried for murder or not. I only knew that I didn't mean to chance having to bear evidence against her. There was very little likelihood of that. Mrs. James, the bouncing, jolly widow and my secret love, had saved money left her by her late husband, and had managed to buy the freehold of Dewlap Hall, an old manor house that had seen better days. It had been one of the homes of the Conyers family, but was now little more than a forlorn, dejected farmhouse, standing alone in a couple of acres about 3 miles out of Durham. It looked even a better place than it was. Once you were inside, you saw that its ruin was only a question of time. It was slowly crumbling, festering, powdering away. Half the rooms were unsafe. The walls of the others were shored up, partitioned off, reduced to 1/4 of their original size. One floor was taken bodily away, I have been told, to lay the ghost. The sharp, jagged rafters sagged downward from the sides. The floor of this room was cobbled. It had lancet windows. People said it was the old chapel. Sally used the place as a wash house. It opened out of her kitchen, which was the old and only hall of the first house. That, Mr. Wilson, the vicar, had told us, was built in the time of Edward II. Of course the house was haunted. The Grey Lady. Sally's bedroom, above, must have been taken off the whole top of the hall. The floor was very bad, and although originally it must have been a handsome-sized, airy and pleasant room in spite of the low ceiling, the late owner had mistrusted the eastern portion of it so much that he had walled it off with boards and some concrete, calmly reducing the best bedroom to a cell about 10 feet square. It was big enough for 2 people, for Sally and me, drunk with love. I believe Sally and I would have made love if we'd been fastened in a barrel studded with nails and rolled down to the sea, but not room enough for 3. On that night, Sally and I, absorbed in each other, hadn't heard the heavy drunkard's footfall of my wife on the creaking steps of the staircase that led up from the house place below, and the sound of the door of the room where we were being slowly pushed open. The heavy bolt that should by rights have gone across it was lying on the wicker chair by the bed. Sally, in her wild confidence in the impossibility of molestation in this lonely part of the country, had omitted to run it into the thole holes on either side of the lintels, as usual. When you did that, you made the chamber into a real castle of strength, but she had forgotten all but me. And poor mad Mary, my wife, stood like the ghost of Dewlap Hall and watched us. Sally, half dazed, may have thought she was the ghost. Anyway, she struck out with the heavy iron bar that lay ready to her hand. She was strong. Hardly another woman could have wielded it. My dog Roger looked up from where he slept, crouched on my coat at the foot of the bed on Sally's packing box. The iron bar was immensely weighty. My poor old wife fell like a log. Roger turned up his eyes. I said, "Down, Roger," and Roger lay down. Though a mere puppy, he was well trained. Sally dropped the bar with a loud clang on the floor. There was nobody below to hear it. It lay there till, seeing my eyes fixed on it, she picked it up easily and replaced it on the chair without even looking at it. But there was no blood or even hairs on it, I could have told her, for I had got hold of Mary by that time and felt her, and I was perfectly sure that she had been stunned, killed outright. So far as I could see, the skin wasn't even broken. Her clumsy straw hat was, of course, smashed, battered in, and her very thick black hair lay like a mat over the crown of her head. Sally asked me if she were dead, and I answered, yes, stone dead. Sally shrugged her shoulders, as who should say, it's fate. Then, without blinking, she put a petticoat on over her nightgown and drew the strings of it tightly round her waist till I should have thought they would have cut her, but I expect she didn't feel much at that particular moment. At least, I didn't. I kept my eyes on her all the time. I thought it might prevent me from going mad. And Sally was sure to know what to do. It was her murder. It was a very warm night, and getting on for 2 o'clock, I should have thought, but no light pierced through the pieces of red gingham that Sally had hung up and gathered into a curtain for the window. I watched Sally. She came up to me and took hold of Mary's feet, and then dropped them again after I had taken the corpse by the shoulders. She stood a moment, a bit mazed, and then she thought of the bar and went to where it lay on the chair by the bedside. She lifted it and examined its iron surface. "Give it to me," I said. I stupidly thought of burning it. "Nonsense," Sally said, quite sharply, wiping it on her nightgown and replacing it on the chair. "Let it stay there where it always lies. Old Betty is used to the sight of it." She was wise. She returned to me and my burden. She took hold of Mary's feet again and didn't drop them this time, but tied a towel around her ankles, thus binding them firmly together. Then, both of us breathing heavily, we got the body down the stairs. I went first. I couldn't see Mary's face, but I saw Sally's, and her lips were red and tightly primmed. Roger, clumsily trying to pass us and our burden on the narrow flight of steps, got under our feet and nearly threw us down, and she unclosed her lips to swear at him. If she had not spoken, I believe I should have dropped. We laid Mary on the stone-flagged kitchen floor while Sally fumbled with the latch of the wash-house. There was a door out of that into the backyard, and thence into a little orchard, and out of that into the wood which stretched away toward Finchell Priory at the back of the house to the north. It was conveniently full of old abandoned pit shafts. I knew that well enough. But it wasn't until we gained the door of the wash-house that it occurred to me what Sally meant to do, and had meant to do from the moment we first lifted Mary to bring her downstairs. There was a little more light now, but still it wasn't light enough to see, and I hoped it wouldn't be until we got into the shelter of the woods. Sally held the feet as before. She swung a lantern by a string from her teeth. She had refused to let me carry it. Sally hadn't much faith in me in the best of times, and now, when so much depended on it, I could see she meant to see to everything herself. Roger followed us. He was very humble and submissive since Sally had spoken to him so roughly. She swore again, but not at him, for he kept out of her way. It was when the long brambles caught the hem of her nightgown that hung below the petticoat. Her eyes flashed a little now and then in the light of the swinging lantern. "I can hardly walk. Got the bloody hem of my shift so wet," she said roughly. "Can you manage?" I asked, speaking very faint. She had said bloody. "Yes. Good thing it's dew, not blood after all," she reassured me. "Don't talk. I've no breath for talking. My word, I sweat, no mistake." I didn't want to talk. I was thinking of Mary, slung between us, dead as dead. And the last time I saw her, she was dead drunk in the streets of Cardiff, reeling about, carrying on her trade. There was no need. That was the shame and the disgrace. I was earning good wages at Neath as a collieryman and gave her fair share. But she'd always taken too much and never been respectable, not even when I married her. They say those two things go together, and luckily there were no children. As soon as I found out what she was up to, I left her, deserted her, people would say, and drifted to Durham. That was full 2 years ago. How did she find out that I had come to Durham and was working at the elephant pit? I never wrote to her once. How did she know I was living with Sally James in her house 3 miles out of Durham? How had she tracked me? I couldn't tell then, and I don't know now. I was wondering, and the undergrowth grew thick, and the nut boughs lashed my cheek in the dark. I stumbled a little as we got along with that between us, and I forgot to keep step with Sally, and she swore at me for an awkward fool that was giving her, a weak woman, all the work to do. We came at last to the old pit shaft Sally and I knew of, for it had been one of our trysting places in her husband's lifetime. Most of these disused shafts are walled around with brick, but this one wasn't, for some reason or other. It was carelessly staked around with wattle, waiting to be done properly, I suppose. A drunken man could easily fall in, and no one be any the wiser. For a pit shaft is so deep you can see the stars in the daylight. Mary must have walked all the way from Cardiff. It was the first time I felt sorry for her. I had been till then so angry with her for coming, ferreting and spying, that if he had asked me, I should have said I was glad she got her deserts. But I couldn't help seeing the worn soles of her shoes as we heaved her over the edge of the hole, and they were fairly walked through. I felt sorry for her then. Mary was gone, without sticking or any awkwardness, and Sally breathed hard. She put out her hand and fondled Roger. "Good dog," she said. "He never barked. He won't tell tales of us, will he, pet?" Roger licked her hand as an answer to her question. He was, even at that age, a wonderfully bright, intelligent dog. Then Sally stooped and tried to pick the long bramble trail out of the hem of her nightgown. It resisted, was hopelessly entangled. "Stand on it," she said, "while I walk on a bit. One can always get rid of followers that way." She alluded to the old superstition that a girl who attracts the wild wood tendrils will always have plenty of sweethearts. Her white feet were quite bare. I never knew a hardier woman than Sally. She looked down into the shaft once, though of course there was nothing to see. It was too dark and deep down. Then she turned around sharp and decided. "Best get back to bed now," she said cheerfully. "There's a good piece of night left. I'm sure we both need a rest." I caught her up in my arms and carried her home. It was only a little bit of a way, no distance at all, though coming out it had seemed so terribly long. She liked being carried. Once she put up her mouth and kissed me. I took her in and set her down in the middle of the house place. She tottered a little, like a china ornament when you've been shifting it. She turned to go upstairs again. I couldn't manage it. "Sally," I said, "I think I'll go and get a wash." "Do," she said, "and you can draw yourself some cider. There's plenty in that barrel in the corner there." I watched her ascend the stairs, rather heavily. Then I whistled my dog. The door of the house stood open. The dawn was just breaking. I latched it carefully behind me and went away down the garden path. I looked back once, only once. Then I took my resolve definitely. I have never seen her since. I secured a passage out west, and we sailed, my poor dog and I, the very next day. And, in my panic, I've never looked at a paper from that day to this. I don't know whether there was an inquiry or not, or whether any suspicion fell on Sally. I should say not, she's too clever. Of one thing I'm quite sure, the body was never found. They never are when they're lost like that. I have an idea, too, that my wife Mary was never even missed in Cardiff. Who cares when prostitutes die or disappear? If, as was probable, no one had chanced to see her approach Dewlap Hall in the early hours in the morning, then there was absolutely no witness of Sally's crime, except myself and my dog Roger. Yet, the thought that plagued me all through that night passes through my mind, and worries me still. I had deserted Mary. I had not seen or communicated with her or any of my old friends in and near Cardiff, I'm a Welshman, for 3 years. So how did she know where to find me? Did she settle to visit all the great mining centers in turn? And did she draw Durham early in the game? And when she got to Durham, how did she get wind of my living at Dewlap with Sally James? My thoughts for the last 7 years have not been pleasant, but they're all the company I've had. I've worked hard here. I've even had a bit of luck and been able to lay by a little, but I've hardly spoken to a single soul. The last man who spent a night in my cabin was a taciturn Japanese who had less conversation than even Roger. It is killing me. That is why 2 nights ago I took up my pen and wrote to Sally. Mrs. James, Dewlap Hall, near Durham, England. I must see her again. And today I have managed somehow or other to mail the letter. Now I wait. I waited a good month. Then there came an answer I had ridden in for to Blizzardville every other day all through the time, speaking to no one except the clerk at the window of the post office, an uncommon dull and slow dog he was. She wrote, "You wretch! What a surprise to hear from you. Have you returned to your senses? I congratulate you. Your letter seems to mean that you have, and I don't mind saying how glad I am. Oh, George, how could you walk off like that, and I lying there expecting you to come back after you'd had a wash and a drink to buck you up? Men always feel these things so much more than women at the time. As for me, you'd be surprised to hear it, but sometimes at nights I'd feel as much remorse as you would have me. Only then, when the good daylight comes in at the pane, I feel so different, one wouldn't believe it was the same woman. Morning thoughts always are more cheerful. You see, I can't forgive her for coming to dig me and you out in our happiness. She had nothing more to do with you. She drank, she sold herself, she got what she deserved, even if it was me that gave it to her. I saw it all as I lifted that great bar. She came meddling, and like all meddlesome fools, she got what for. If you had considered it yourself for one moment, you never would have left me like that. But now you've thought it over, and you've thought better of it, and you're coming back to me. Come, only come. All is serene, as I dare say you know. Nobody bothered. William Dysart fooled about me a little when you left the field free, but I treated him with a high hand, and I am shot of him, except for a lowering look he gives me over the top of his pew in church on Sunday. They say he is my enemy, but even he can't see to the bottom of a pit shaft, and there's no evidence. I am respected in the place, and I can marry anyone I please and when I please. Shan't it be you, George? Aren't you and I bound by the memory of that night and what I did to get you? Come, your own wicked, level-headed Sally. P.S. I suppose the dog Roger, who was a puppy then, has died a natural death? Poor old dear. I was jealous of that dog. I always felt you liked him nearly as well as you liked me. Peace be to his bones. Roger looked up at me as I looked down his way when I came to that last piece all about him. I believe I read it aloud softly. I am in the habit of talking to Roger. He knows perfectly well what one says to him. I stroked him. "Dead? Not a bit of it, old dog," I said. "We are all alive and kicking, aren't we? Very well preserved. Eyes a little bleary, perhaps. Not many teeth in our head, but those sound, and that's half the battle." Roger fawned on me. He is a quiet, taciturn creature, like his master, and I verily believe the sound of his own voice has got to scare him almost as much as mine does me. "You'll come to England with me, old dog, won't you? You and me'll never be parted. She must take us both, for better or worse, eh?" Roger's tail wagged. He said nothing, but of course he understood. I could not have left him, even if I'd wanted to die alone in a strange country. Besides, he knows all about me. He saw it all. I can still see him looking pensively down into the pit shaft after. He is my only confidant, for of course I never let on to anyone. I could never risk giving Sally away. But a dog? Yes, I'm glad he knows. I could not get ready to leave for about a week, and before I started I got another letter from Sally. It must have been written not much more than a day after the first letter, and there seemed no particular reason why she should ever have written it. It was rather incoherent. The thought of our meeting again must have troubled her, must have a little turned her head. She mixed up all sorts of things in her letters and mentioned Roger again 3 or 4 times in connection with William Dysart, who she seems to fancy has got his knife into her. A despised lover, but still. I began to fear that the sight of my dog would distress her, remind her of that awful night when suddenly and without thought or premeditation she up and did a sin for me. What was I to do? It was but woman's nonsense at the best, and I couldn't leave my faithful beast to pine and starve because of a woman's whim. I consoled myself with the reflection that a hard, sensible woman, such as Sally had proved herself to be, would not allow any mere fancy to affect her for long. She would force herself to get over it, and ignore it as she had the other. I settled it the way I wanted to, and took Roger with me. I made one tiresome discovery on the way home. I was pretty deaf, and could hear very ill unless the speaker addressed himself especially to me, a general conversation not at all. This saddened me. Even a slight deafness makes a man such a nuisance, and I thought it might put Sally off, or even set her willful mightiness against me. Sally was never very patient at the best of times. You see, I thought of everything in relation to her. Her crime and her heartlessness and want of feeling with regard to it seemed not to affect my appreciation of her in any way. Indeed, I admired her devil-may-carishness because it was on the whole the most decent way for her to behave. I should have hated her to whine and snivel. I walked out from Durham one fine Sunday morning in May, Roger trotting at my heels. I had asked no questions about Sally and her circumstances. I knew from her letter that she was well, and moreover I experienced some difficulty in framing questions, or indeed in getting into conversation at all. I don't believe I spoke more than 2 consecutive sentences all the way back, and those I mumbled in my beard for all the world as if I were tongue-tied. No one bothered about me, and I expect I was singularly unattractive, and for the most part I was left severely alone. I had lost all convivial habits. I didn't care to see or hear anything. I never looked at a paper. My one idea was to see Sally again. Roger was not so unsociable. Indeed, my trouble with him was that he was the reverse. He seemed to be continually getting into conversations and eventually into fights with other dogs. One dog, a sandy, weedy terrier, lame of one leg, that we met as soon as we got out at Durham Station, he seemed, after having fought handsomely with, to take a great fancy to, and the wretched and lame cur chose to follow us all the way out to Dewlap Hall. It was disturbing, and I should have preferred to have kept my faithful dog entirely to myself at a moment like this. I was going to meet the woman I loved again after all these years, and only Roger knew what it'd been. It was Sunday morning, and I heard bells ringing at the different churches all the way out. Sally was standing in the clear morning light at the low door of her house close to the monthly rose bush which stood as high as she did. There was but one rose on it. She wore a pink cotton dress. She had grown a little stouter. She held her hand straight across her forehead against the sun which came into her eyes and made her frown. Or was it the sight of me? For indeed, her black eyebrows were cruelly drawn down as Roger and I and Roger's friend came up the flagged path. But all she said was, as she took her hand away from her face and laid it in mine, "Come in." She pulled me inside and shut the door in Roger's face. He set up a whine. "Poor Roger," I said, in spite of myself and my wish not to annoy her. "Don't you remember him?" "Yes, but why did you bring the wretched creature here? I thought he was dead. I understood you to say so." She stood there, quaking, quivering with anger. I had never seen Sally so unmanned. "Never mind the dog, Sally. Kiss me." She kissed me. Then she said thoughtfully, "Perhaps, on the whole, I had better have him in." She opened the door and drove away the stranger dog. Roger she seized, hauling him in by the collar. She then carefully bolted the door with one hand, sticking to Roger with the other. "Have you got a chain?" "What for, Sally?" "To chain him up. I can't have him loose. He's been talking to that mongrel of Dysart's. I know the malicious beast, and when dogs get talking together. Now—" "Talking? My dear Sally." "Oh, you know what I mean. It was William Dysart who directed Mary here that night, or rather morning. He's longing to get his knife into me, or you." "But was there an inquiry? I didn't read any of the papers. I was so afraid of what I might see there. You understand." She looked at me narrowly. Then she tossed her head. "Silly fellow. There's nothing to make you uneasy. There wasn't a word of gossip. No one knew. There was one woman less on the streets of Cardiff, that's all." "But you said William Dysart directed her here?" "Yes, that came out in a roundabout way. But he didn't know who she was, or that she didn't just come here and go straight back again where she came from. If only you had taken my hint." "What hint?" "About Roger." "You do puzzle me, Sally. You only said you supposed he was dead. Well, he isn't, that's all, and mighty glad I am of it. And he isn't used to being tied up, and I'm not going to put upon the old dog now." "I can't help it. He doesn't go free in my house. We must talk it over. Meantime—" She left me abruptly. Sally never dawdled, not even over a murder. Trailing Roger helplessly by the collar, she went into the wash-house next door. I followed her, grumbling a little, but still quite her humble slave. She made his collar more secure, and then tied him to the copper. Then she reached up to a high shelf and gave him a handsome plate full of bones and a pat on the head that had more of monition than kindness in it. Roger looked up at me. He seemed to understand the situation better than I did. "Keep in with her. Don't irritate her," he seemed to say. He shivered and seemed cold. "Tell him to be a good dog and behave himself," she said to me, "and he shall be loose tomorrow if I can feel quite sure of him. Things are changed a bit, George, since you were here, and it is easy to see you have not kept pace with them. We must brush you up and bring you up to date." She was very nervous. I followed her out of the wash-house, closing the door behind me as she bade me over her shoulder. In the living room, she turned and faced me. She was a very beautiful woman, was Sally James. Her white teeth showed keen as her short upper lip was drawn up from them. It made her look fine, but a bit cruel. She was not a very big woman, but stately, majestic even, at times, although she was only a farmer's widow and daughter. Just now, as she stood there, her arms at her side, her broad breast, covered with pink print, was like a queen's. She was holding herself in readiness for my first embrace, and I longed for it too, and yet I distrusted her. She was without principle, a figure of shifting sand. She would always do exactly as she liked, at the moment when she liked. And she hated my dog. I invented excuses for her. It's all association, I thought as I hung back. She's not so heartless as she seems. The dog was in the room when it happened and by the shaft when we heaved her over. He reminds her. She has some feeling. My distrust turned all at once to tenderness, and I sat down on the settle and took her in my arms. She was very soft and yielding, and she sat meekly on my knee and kissed me passionately again and again. Then I kissed her back just the same. The tall clock ticked as it did on that night, only louder. There didn't seem to be a soul about. I asked Sally if she had no servant to help her. "I've a woman, old Betty, do you remember her? Comes to help me all the week through, but she stays away on Sundays. The farmhands sleep nearly a quarter of a mile away. You'll stop tonight, George?" I said I would. In my heart, I wondered if her room was still the same, and if I could stand it. Part 2. A movement in the room awoke me. I opened my eyes slowly, and in the gray light I put out my hand and missed Sally. She had left my side. I put some clothes on and went down the little steep single stairs lit only by one dirty cobwebby window. The scanty twilight, for that was all it was as yet, slid in and onto the white lintels, cracked and seamed with age. I never liked the dawn when people die. The moon was paling quietly in the sky. The morning star still lingered there. At the corner where the stairs turned sharply, I looked down at my feet and remembered the job we had to get Mary past it. Drops of sweat broke out on my forehead just as they had done then. That and the dawn. I was very nervous. It was nearly the same as that other night. Sally was not in the house place. I stood, turning on my heels, and wondered where she was. I made no doubt that she was walking in her sleep, that seeing me had brought back all the sensations of that dreadful night and that she was repeating them. Perhaps she had remembered the light on the lintel, the turn of the stair too. What I feared was that she had gone wandering along the same dreary path through the wood as far as the shaft. And then, when she got there, suppose her remorse was too much for her and she were mad enough to throw herself over? Such things have happened. I had seen the bells in Macbeth. Sally was rather like Lady Macbeth, and Lady Macbeth, strong-minded as she was, rued her deed, and walked in her sleep, and rubbed her hands. Sally had no blood to think about, only dew on the hem of her nightgown that time. You couldn't tell blood from dew at night. I heard a click, something like the sound made by one earthenware pan rubbing against another in the wash-house. I had maligned Sally in my thoughts. She had merely gone downstairs to feed Roger. The last remark she had made in going to bed was that he looked weakly and on his last legs and should by rights be put away before he suffered pain. Dogs die so hard, she had said. I opened the door that led into the old stone-paved chapel Sally used as a wash-house and stood the beer casks in. Sally, in her plain nightgown, was standing there barefoot on the cobbled stones. She looked a bit cranky. Her black hair hung partly down her back and in elf locks that were curls overnight in her eyes. She had a great quantity of hair, and out of vanity she never took it all down when she went to bed, but half arranged it with pins and colored ribbons. Her arm was raised to a high shelf when she had taken Roger's provender earlier in the day. The movement made the fronts of her nightgown gape and show her breast. She started when I came in and dropped her arm guiltily. "Go away, go away!" she screamed and put her hand behind her back. "Go away and let me finish the job." "What job in heaven's name?" I cried. "At this hour of night? We saw to the dog. There's no need to feed him again." "Feed him, you idiot! Poison him, more likely. Anything to get him out of the way." I went up to her and laid my hand on her arm. "I do believe the sight of Roger, who saw you murder Mary, has put you clean out of your wits, Sally, my dear." "And what about you and your wits bringing the beast here?" She rushed at poor Roger, who squatted at the extreme length of his cord, staring at her calmly, boldly, as if inviting her to stick him with the knife she brandished. He was never like any other dog. He did not plunge or bark. I saved him. I took the knife out of her hand and flung it into a meal tub close by. "Fool! Fool!" she yelled, but I put my hand over her mouth and forced her back on the tub so that she sat on the knife. I was so sure she was going mad that it made me calm and strong, and I tried to soothe her and speak gently to her, as one does to an invalid. "What do you want to kill my poor old dog for, Sally?" I must. He's dangerous." "Dangerous without a sound tooth in his head?" "He has a tongue in his head." She looked at me narrowly, dragging down the outside corners of her eyelids like a bulldog. Then she pulled the fronts of her nightdress too and tried to speak reasonably. She succeeded more or less, but it was a great effort to her. "Don't you know what has happened here while you have been away sulking at the other end of the world?" I said nothing on purpose, so as not to put her back up. She stood staring at me, waiting for me to say something. I was so long she began to shake in the cold, and Sally never could keep quiet for long. Her temper broke out and she shouted at me, "Don't look so stupid, George! God, it sends me mad!" "Dear, try and tell me quietly." I sat down at an empty barrel. "Come here, sit on my knee." She waved me away. She moistened her lips. "Don't treat me like a child or a madwoman, George. It is serious, sober, earnest. I am telling you facts, not lies. The police, damn them, have got a new weapon, and they use it for all it is worth." She wrung her hands and walked up and down. "How to think that all this time we have made pets of these wretched animals and trusted them. I had a pet dog once. I put it away because it watched me, though I wasn't doing anything wrong. Yes, we used to let them go about with us and see all we did and listen to all we said. Who minded talking secrets with an animal in the room or doing anything one liked in a whole farmyard of beasts then? We didn't know that dog of yours was lying at the foot of the bed when Mary was done for. I never even thought of him. We actually let him go with us to the edge of the shaft and see us throw her in. God, what fools we were." "But what can a dog do, you silly darling?" "He can get us hanged. Get us both hanged. Why, your beast there, the very moment he got into England, he must have learnt his power. He must have blabbed our whole story, and to that animal of Dysart's, too, to the very last person." I tried to soothe her. "Sally, my dear, it's awfully cold here. You're shivering. Do let us go back to bed." I said that, but indeed I was getting to be afraid of her, in bed or out of it. She took no notice of me, but went on. "You never looked at a paper, you tell me, and yet they were full of it 2 years ago, the wonderful new discovery. Since then, I've never known a moment's peace. My life has been hell. You may thank your stars you were out of it and had left me to bear the whole brunt of it." "For goodness' sake, explain," I said crossly. She came quite close to me and whispered, "The police. It's a new dodge of the police. I hate 'em and their filthy methods. They get a hold of animals, dogs preferred because they're more intelligent, and shut them down there in cellars behind locked doors, and then they torture them, rack them. George, can you bear the idea of Roger tortured, racked, kept without water for a week? Oh, if you had heard, as I have, scores of times, only I've run away and said nothing because of my guilty conscience. If you had heard the pitiful howls and whines at the back of the police station there, and knew that some poor helpless beast was being made to betray and give evidence." "But I don't see how a dog, or any animal indeed, could let on to what it knew even if it tried," I said, grave as a judge, to pacify her. "Oh, that's a mere matter of detail. The police have got a code. They manage to communicate with the beasts. They count the barks." I laughed. "Don't you dare to laugh, you ignorant fool. Have you never heard of those spiritualist affairs? The spirits rap and the medium tells you what they're saying. While the dog barks, it comes to the same thing." She sighed deeply and seemed relieved. It was now quite day. Her candle flared. She was waiting for me to speak. I was thinking of what would be the most soothing thing to say. It would not come. I was at my wit's end. The only thing I could think of was to get her back to bed and send for a doctor. I moved slightly in my indecision. She caught my hand. Hers was very hot. "George, what are you going to do? I've explained clearly, haven't I?" Quite. I had now fixed on a plan of action. "And now, Sally darling," I said softly, "just you get back to bed, and I'll settle Roger, and then I'll bring you a nice cup of tea." That plan failed. She screamed and beat the air with her hands. "Settle him? Not you. It takes a man to do that, or a woman like me. No, I know you. You want me to go quietly while you untie the dog and let him go free to get us hanged. Me, at any rate. I murdered Mary. You only looked on. And your dog. What'll you get? I shall swing for it. He's sure to have told Dysart's dog, and the police'll get wind of it. Dysart'll take care of that. He's only waiting, has been these 10 years. And then they can howk Mary up, what's left of her, and the damn dog'll tell them who put her there." "Do you suppose Roger would betray us?" I said, humoring her. She was crying now, violently, against my heart. "But George, under torture, there's no knowing what he might do. Is there, Roger?" She left me, contemptuously, and bending down a little, spoke to Roger as if he were a human being. That gave me a turn, and I felt very queer. She seemed so sure of herself and her tale. Roger appeared to listen. He barked 3 times, then 4 times, then more. I lost count. But Sally didn't, apparently. She wiped her eyes on the sleeve of her nightgown, tossed her head back, and cried triumphantly, "There! He says I'd better warn you. He can't be quite sure. He's not so young as he was. His power of endurance is weakened. That's what he says, as well as he can, to me who understand him. Did you notice," she continued, "how Dysart's dog limps? Oh, that's because, everyone knows it, though it's supposed to be a secret, the police examined him, tormented, I call it, a year ago, in connection with a case of arson. Dysart's ricks were set on fire." She chuckled. "Who was accused?" "Me." "And did you?" "That's not the point. Dysart's dog was got to admit that he had seen one of my men loitering about at an awkward time, the time when it happened, in fact. The police couldn't make anything of his evidence. It was too scanty, luckily, but all the same he's gone lame ever since. I hate the police as I hate sin. Brutes they are. Roger, good dog, tell me, how did you learn the code in this short time?" Roger barked gently, a little chain of barks. "From Dysart's dog, he says. It's quite simple. Well, George, look here. No, I'm not cold when I'm interested. I'll go on getting it from Roger, and perhaps I'll be able to convince you that for his own sake Roger had better be put out of the way. He wishes it." "I am convinced," I said. I was convinced that she was off her head on this particular point, and that a good rest would set her right. I put my arm round her and tried to kiss her and lead her away, but she pushed me off. "Go and sit over there. Don't worry me. I want all my wits about me now, and once you see the danger, if you love me, you won't set the life of an old, toothless, worn-out dog against mine, for that's what it comes to." "I do love you, Sally. Now, Roger, stand and deliver. Answer the lady." There was no good fighting hallucinations. It's best to humor them. Any doctor would have agreed with me that it was useless to argue with a woman so terribly excited as Sally was. There she stood, barefooted on the stone floor, in the light circle that the candle made, waving her arms and casting shadows of an awful length and shape. The black, jagged ends of the rafters of the broken flooring over her head framed her in spikes as they sagged and drooped towards the middle of the room where she was. Nice homecoming for a man after all these years. I wished then, how I wished I had stayed in Wyoming with my faithful Roger and only seen Sally as I remembered her, plucky, resolute and sensible, instead of the all-to-pieces madwoman remorse had made of her. But she was determined to go through with the mad farce. She stooped, tossed back her hair, and fixed Roger with her eyes. He met them, as dogs do, without flinching or turning away. Poor dear old Roger was so faithful and so old, I did wish she would leave him alone. But no. "Roger," she said solemnly, "did Dysart's dog warn you of the state of things here and of what might happen to you?" A lot of little orderly barks answered her. Though Roger always did bark when you spoke to him in a certain domineering tone, it was fairly horrible. Sally turned to me, and her voice was lifted with pride. "He says yes, that he is fully informed. Moreover, Dysart's dog has told him that his master has had suspicions of you ever since a certain tramp woman he met on the Witten-Gilbert road was so keen on finding her way to you. William Dysart told her she would probably find you in bed with me, blast and curse him. I'm glad I burnt 5 of his ricks." Come, Sally, does my dog really say all of that?" I mocked her. "He says that and a lot more. That Dysart went straight to the police this morning after seeing you and your dog walk across the marketplace. Now then." "Damn it all, that's where Roger picked up the cur first," I called out, for I own this struck me. And the dog's manner was disquieting. All this was exciting and very bad for him. He shivered and whined very low. Roger, old man." I caressed him and talked to him as if he was human and sensible, as indeed he was, but only as dogs, the best of them, are. "Don't take on so. What is it? What's the matter?" "He'll tell you fast enough," Sally said, grinning. She went up to him, too, and passed her hands over his back. "Come, tell us all about it, good dog." I couldn't bear to see her lay her Judas hand on him. I shouted, "Don't you touch my dog, you—" I couldn't find a word bad enough for her, not even one of the worst. All my love for her had gone, melted away. "All right," she answered carelessly, desisting. So we both stood at an equal distance from Roger, who barked incessantly for about 5 minutes. I thought I noticed gaps between the groups of barks, as it were, but even now I cannot be quite sure. Sally had got me into the same state as the dog. We were both beside ourselves, fairly bewitched, I think. Now Sally translated in a level voice. Her quiet was more awful than her bluster. "He says, 'Master, save me from the torture. I am old, I have not many months to live. Shoot me first. I may not be able to stop myself from betraying you, and her. Shoot me in mercy, shoot me.'" "Is that so, Roger?" I asked him. The spell wrought on me so that I began to believe it. "Do you want me to kill you?" He barked. Yes, he barked horribly. Then I turned on Sally, and she held up her head and looked at me with insolence in the face, and the dog began to plunge and strain on the cord, barking furiously all the time. "You devil!" I yelled. "You are taking me in. This is all a plan got up to make me put away my faithful old dog." "Look at your dog," she said calmly. "He has more sense than you. Do you know what he is trying to do? He's trying to commit suicide. He says it's his only chance if you won't shoot him. You coward! Afraid to put him out of his misery and help him to get out of the way before he's forced to betray you? Go and get your gun. Kill him, man, or let me." I came out of my maze just in time. I saw Sally whip the knife out from under her and go for Roger with it. The dog had nearly succeeded in strangling himself. He had come to make gurgling noises in his throat, but I was all there now. "Don't you do it, old dog!" I up and shouted. "I'll settle her as she settled Mary." And that is why I am sitting here in Durham jail, waiting to be hanged, and a good riddance, too. I don't care to live. Poor Roger did manage to commit suicide. He knew. Transformation by Mary Shelley. Forthwith this frame of mine was wrenched with a woeful agony, which forced me to begin my tale, and then it set me free. Since then, at an uncertain hour, the agony returns, until my ghastly tale is told, this heart within me burns. I have heard it said that, when any strange, supernatural, and necromantic adventure has occurred to a human being, that being, however desirous he may be to conceal the same, feels, at certain periods, torn up, as it were, by an intellectual earthquake, and is forced to bare the inner depths of his spirit to another. I am a witness of the truth of this. I have dearly sworn to myself never to reveal to human ears the horrors to which I once, in excess of fiendly pride, delivered myself over. The holy man who heard my confession and reconciled me to the church is dead. No one knows that once. Why should it not be thus? Why tell a tale of impious tempting of providence and soul-subduing humiliation? Why? Answer me, ye who are wise in the secrets of human nature. I only know that so it is, and in spite of strong resolve, of a pride that too much masters me, of shame and even of fear, so to render myself odious to my species, I must speak. Genoa, my birthplace, proud city, looking upon the blue waves of the Mediterranean Sea, dost thou remember me in my boyhood, when thy cliffs and promontories, thy bright sky and gay vineyards were my world? Happy time, when to the young heart the narrow-bounded universe, which leaves, by its very limitation, free scope to the imagination, enchains our physical energies, and, sole period in our lives, innocence and enjoyment are united. Yet, who can look back to childhood and not remember its sorrows and its harrowing fears? I was born with the most imperious, haughty, tameless spirit with which ever mortal was gifted. I quailed before my father only, and he, generous and noble, but capricious and tyrannical, at once fostered and checked the wild impetuosity of my character, making obedience necessary, but inspiring no respect for the motives which guided his commands. To be a man, free, independent, or, in better words, insolent and domineering, was the hope and prayer of my rebel heart. My father had one friend, a wealthy Genoese noble, who, in a political tumult, was suddenly sentenced to banishment and his property confiscated. The Marchese Torella went into exile alone. Like my father, he was a widower. He had one child, the almost infant Juliet, who was left under my father's guardianship. I should certainly have been an unkind master to the lovely girl, but that I was forced by my position to become her protector. A variety of childish incidents all tended to one point, to make Juliet see in me a rock of refuge, I in her one who must perish through the soft sensibility of her nature too rudely visited, but for my guardian care. We grew up together. The opening rose in May was not more sweet than this dear girl. An irradiation of beauty was spread over her face, her form, her step, her voice. My heart weeps even now to think of all of relying, gentle, loving, and pure that was enshrined in that celestial tenement. When I was 11 and Juliet 8 years of age, a cousin of mine, much older than either, he seemed to us a man, took great notice of my playmate. He called her his bride and asked her to marry him. She refused, and he insisted, drawing her unwillingly towards him. With the countenance and emotions of a maniac, I threw myself on him. I strove to draw his sword. I clung to his neck with the ferocious resolve to strangle him. He was obliged to call for assistance to disengage himself from me. On that night, I led Juliet to the chapel of our house. I made her touch the sacred relics. I harrowed her child's heart and profaned her child's lips with an oath that she would be mine, and mine only. Well, Those days passed away. Torella returned in a few years and became wealthier and more prosperous than ever. When I was 17, my father died. He had been magnificent to prodigality. Torella rejoiced that my minority would afford an opportunity for repairing my fortunes. Juliet and I had been affianced beside my father's deathbed. Torella was to be a second parent to me. I desired to see the world, and I was indulged. I went to Florence, to Rome, to Naples. Thence I passed to Toulon, and at length reached what had long been the bourne of my wishes, Paris. There was wild work in Paris then. The poor king, Charles VI, now sane, now mad, now a monarch, now an abject slave, was the very mockery of humanity. The queen, the dauphin, the Duke of Burgundy, alternately friends and foes, now meeting in prodigal feasts, now shedding blood in rivalry, were blind to the miserable state of their country and the dangers that impended over it, and gave themselves wholly up to dissolute enjoyment or savage strife. My character still followed me. I was arrogant and self-willed. I loved display, and above all, I threw all control far from me. Who could control me in Paris? My young friends were eager to foster passions which furnished them with pleasures. I was deemed handsome. I was master of every knightly accomplishment. I was disconnected with any political party. I grew a favorite with all. My presumption and arrogance were pardoned in one so young. I became a spoiled child. Who could control me? Not the letters and advice of Torella. Only strong necessity visiting me in the abhorred shape of an empty purse. But there were means to refill this void. Acre after acre, estate after estate, I sold. My dress, my jewels, my horses and their caparisons were almost unrivaled in gorgeous Paris, while the lands of my inheritance passed into the possession of others. The Duke of Orléans was waylaid and murdered by the Duke of Burgundy. Fear and terror possessed all Paris. The Dauphin and the Queen shut themselves up. Every pleasure was suspended. I grew weary of this state of things, and my heart yearned for my boyhood's haunts. I was nearly a beggar, yet still I would go there, claim my bride, and rebuild my fortunes. A few happy ventures as a merchant would make me rich again. Nevertheless, I would not return in humble guise. My last act was to dispose of my remaining estate near Albaro for half its worth, for ready money. Then I dispatched all kinds of artificers, arras, furniture of regal splendor, to fit up the last relic of my inheritance, my palace in Genoa. I lingered a little longer yet, ashamed at the part of the prodigal returned, which I feared I should play. I sent my horses. One matchless Spanish jennet I dispatched to my promised bride, its caparisons flamed with jewels and cloth of gold. In every part I caused to be entwined the initials of Juliet and her Guido. My present found favor in hers and in her father's eyes. Still, to return a proclaimed spendthrift, the mark of impertinent wonder, perhaps of scorn, and to enter singly the reproaches or taunts of my fellow citizens was no alluring prospect. As a shield between me and censure, I invited some few of the most reckless of my comrades to accompany me. Thus I went armed against the world, hiding a rankling feeling, half fear and half penitence, by bravado and an insolent display of satisfied vanity. I arrived in Genoa. I trod the pavement of my ancestral palace. My proud step was no interpreter of my heart, for I deeply felt that, though surrounded by every luxury, I was a beggar. The first step I took in claiming Juliet must widely declare me such. I read contempt or pity in the looks of all. I fancied, so apt is conscience to imagine what it deserves, that rich and poor, young and old, all regarded me with derision. Torella came not near me. No wonder that my second father should expect a son's deference from me in waiting first on him. But, galled and stung by a sense of my follies and demerit, I strove to throw the blame on others. We kept nightly orgies in Palazzo Carrega. To sleepless, riotous nights followed listless, supine mornings. At the Ave Maria we showed our dainty persons in the streets, scoffing at the sober citizens, casting insolent glances on the shrinking women. Juliet was not among them. No, no. If she had been there, shame would have driven me away, if love had not brought me to her feet. I grew tired of this. Suddenly I paid the Marchese a visit. He was at his villa, one among many which deck the suburbs of San Pietro del Reina. It was the month of May, a month of May in that garden of the world. The blossoms of the fruit trees were fading among thick green foliage. The vines were shooting forth, the ground strewn with the fallen olive blooms. The firefly was in the myrtle hedge. Heaven and earth wore a mantle of surpassing beauty. Torella welcomed me kindly, though seriously, and even his shade of displeasure soon wore away. Some resemblance to my father, some look and tone of youthful ingenuousness still lurking in spite of my misdeeds, softened the good old man's heart. He sent for his daughter. He presented me to her as her betrothed. The chamber became hallowed by a holy light as she entered. Hers was that cherub look, those large, soft eyes, full dimpled cheeks, and mouth of infantine sweetness that expresses the rare union of happiness and love. Admiration first possessed me. She is mine, was the second proud emotion, and my lips curled with haughty triumph. I had not been the enfant gâté of the beauties of Paris not to have learned the art of pleasing the soft heart of woman. If toward men I was overbearing, the deference I paid to them was the more in contrast. I commenced my courtship by the display of 1,000 gallantries to Juliet, who, vowed to me from infancy, had never admitted the devotion of others, and who, though accustomed to expressions of admiration, was uninitiated in the language of lovers. For a few days all went well. Torella never alluded to my extravagance. He treated me as a favorite son. But the time came, as we discussed the preliminaries to my union with his daughter, when this fair face of things should be overcast. A contract had been drawn up in my father's lifetime. I had rendered this, in fact, void by having squandered the whole of the wealth which was to have been shared by Juliet and myself. Torella, in consequence, chose to consider this bond as cancelled, and proposed another, in which, though the wealth he bestowed was immeasurably increased, there were so many restrictions as to the mode of spending it that I, who saw independence only in free career being given to my own imperious will, taunted him as taking advantage of my situation and refused utterly to subscribe to his conditions. The old man mildly strove to recall me to reason. Roused pride became the tyrant of my thought. I listened with indignation. I repelled him with disdain. Juliet, thou art mine. Did we not interchange vows in our innocent childhood? Are we not one in the sight of God? And shall thy cold-hearted, cold-blooded father divide us? Be generous, my love. Be just. Take not away a gift, last treasure of thy Guido. Retract not thy vows. Let us defy the world, and setting it not to the calculations of age, find in our mutual affection a refuge from every ill. Fiend I must have been, with such sophistry, to endeavor to poison that sanctuary of holy thought and tender love. Juliet shrank from me, affrighted. Her father was the best and kindest of men, and she strove to show me how, in obeying him, every good would follow. He would receive my tardy submission with warm affection, and generous pardon would follow my repentance. Profitless words for a young and gentle daughter to use to a man accustomed to make his will law, and to feel in his own heart a despot so terrible and stern that he could yield obedience to naught save his own imperious desires. My resentment grew with resistance. My wild companions were ready to add fuel to the flame. We laid a plan to carry off Juliet. At first it appeared to be crowned with success. Midway on our return, we were overtaken by the agonized father and his attendants. A conflict ensued. Before the city guard came to decide the victory in favor of our antagonists, 2 of Torella's servitors were dangerously wounded. This portion of my history weighs most heavily with me. Changed man as I am, I abhor myself in the recollection. May none who hear this tale ever have felt as I. A horse driven to fury by a rider armed with barbed spurs was not more a slave than I to the violent tyranny of my temper. A fiend possessed my soul, irritating it to madness. I felt the voice of conscience within me, but if I yielded to it for a brief interval, it was only to be a moment after torn as by a whirlwind away, borne along on the stream of desperate rage, the plaything of the storms engendered by pride. I was imprisoned and, at the insistence of Torella, set free. Again I returned to carry off both him and his child to France, which hapless country, then preyed upon by freebooters and gangs of lawless soldiery, offered a grateful refuge to a criminal like me. Our plots were discovered. I was sentenced to banishment, and, as my debts were already enormous, my remaining property was put in the hands of commissioners for their payment. Torella again offered his mediation, requiring only my promise not to renew my abortive attempts on himself and his daughter. I spurned his offers and fancied that I triumphed when I was thrust out from Genoa, a solitary and penniless exile. My companions were gone. They had been dismissed from the city some weeks before and were already in France. I was alone, friendless, with nor sword at my side, nor ducat in my purse. I wandered along the seashore, a whirlwind of passion possessing and tearing my soul. It was as if a live coal had been set burning in my breast. At first I meditated on what I should do. I would join a band of freebooters. Revenge! The word seemed balm to me. I hugged it, caressed it, till, like a serpent, it stung me. Then again I would abjure and despise Genoa, that little corner of the world. I would return to Paris, where so many of my friends swarmed, where my services would be eagerly accepted, where I would carve out fortune with my sword, and might, through success, make my paltry birthplace and the false Torella rue the day when they drove me, a new Coriolanus, from her walls. I would return to Paris, thus, on foot, a beggar, and present myself in my poverty to those I had formerly entertained sumptuously. There was gall in the mere thought of it. The reality of things began to dawn upon my mind, bringing despair in its train. For several months I had been a prisoner. The evils of my dungeon had whipped my soul to madness, but they had subdued my corporeal frame. I was weak and wan. Torella had used 1,000 artifices to administer to my comfort. I had detected and scorned them all, and reaped the harvest of my obduracy. What was to be done? Should I crouch before my foe and sue for forgiveness? Die rather 10,000 deaths. Never should they obtain that victory. Hate! I swore eternal hate. Hate from whom? To whom? From a wandering outcast to a mighty noble. I and my feelings were nothing to them. Already had they forgotten one so unworthy. And Juliet, her angel face and sylph-like form gleamed among the clouds of my despair with vain beauty, for I had lost her, the glory and flower of the world. Another will call her his. That smile of paradise will bless another. Even now my heart fails within me when I recur to this rout of grim-visaged ideas. Now subdued almost to tears, now raving in my agony, still I wandered along the rocky shore, which grew at each step wilder and more desolate. Hanging rocks and hoar precipices overlooked the tideless ocean, black caverns yawned, and forever among the sea-worn recesses murmured and dashed the unfruitful waters. Now my way was almost barred by an abrupt promontory, now rendered nearly impracticable by fragments fallen from the cliff. Evening was at hand, when seaward arose, as if on the waving of a wizard's wand, a murky web of clouds, blotting the late azure sky and darkening and disturbing the till now placid deep. The clouds had strange, fantastic shapes, and they changed and mingled and seemed to be driven about by a mighty spell. The waves raised their white crests. The thunder first muttered, then roared from across the waste of waters, which took a deep purple dye flecked with foam. The spot where I stood looked on one side to the widespread ocean, on the other it was barred by a rugged promontory, and round this cape suddenly came, driven by the wind, a vessel. In vain the mariners tried to force a path for her to the open sea. The gale drove her onto the rocks. It will perish. All on board will perish. Would I were among them, and to my young heart the idea of death came for the first time blended with that of joy. It was an awful sight to behold that vessel struggling with her fate. Hardly could I discern the sailors, but I heard them. It was soon all over. A rock, just covered by the tossing waves and so unperceived, lay in wait for its prey. A crash of thunder broke over my head at the moment that, with a frightful shock, the skiff dashed upon her unseen enemy. In a brief space of time she went to pieces. There I stood in safety. There were my fellow creatures, battling, now hopelessly, with annihilation. Methought I saw them struggling. Too truly did I hear their shrieks, conquering the barking surges in their shrill agony. The dark breakers threw hither and thither the fragments of the wreck. Soon it disappeared. I had been fascinated to gaze till the end, till at last I sank on my knees. I covered my face with my hands. I again looked up. Something was floating on the billows toward the shore. It neared and neared. Was that a human form? It grew more distinct, and at last a mighty wave, lifting the whole freight, lodged it upon the rock. A human being bestriding a sea chest. A human being, yet was it one? Surely never had such existed before. A misshapen dwarf, with squinting eyes, distorted features, and body deformed till it became a horror to behold. My blood, lately warming toward a fellow being so snatched from a watery tomb, froze in my heart. The dwarf got off his chest. He tossed his straight, straggling hair from his odious visage. "By Saint Beelzebub," he exclaimed, "I have been well bested." He looked around and saw me. "Oh, by the fiend, here is another ally of the mighty one. To what saint did you offer prayers, friend, if not to mine? Yet I remember you not on board." I shrank from the monster and his blasphemy. Again he questioned me, and I muttered some inaudible reply. He continued, "Your voice is drowned by this dissonant roar. What noise the big ocean makes! Schoolboys bursting from their prison are not louder than these waves set free to play. They disturb me. I will no more of their ill-timed brawlings. Silence, hoary one! Waves, avaunt to your homes! Clouds, fly to the antipodes, and leave our heaven clear." As he spoke, he stretched out his two long, lank arms that looked like spiders' claws and seemed to embrace with them the expanse before him. Was it a miracle? The clouds became broken and fled. The azure sky first peeped out and then was spread, a calm field of blue above us. The stormy gale was exchanged to the softly breathing west. The sea grew calm. The waves dwindled to riplets. "I like obedience, even in these stupid elements," said the dwarf. "How much more in the tameless mind of man? It was a well-got-up storm, you must allow, and all of my own making." It was tempting Providence to interchange talk with this magician, but power, in all its shapes, is venerable to man. Awe, curiosity, a clinging fascination drew me towards him. "Come, don't be frightened, friend," said the wretch. "I'm good-humored when pleased, and something does please me in your well-proportioned body and handsome face, although you look a little woe-begone. You have suffered a land, I a sea wreck. Perhaps I can allay the tempest of your fortunes as I did my own. Shall we be friends?" And he held out his hand. I could not touch it. "Well then, companions, that will do as well. And now, while I rest after the buffeting I underwent just now, tell me why, young and gallant as you seem, you wander thus alone and downcast on this wild seashore." The voice of the wretch was screeching and horrid, and his contortions as he spoke were frightful to behold. Yet he did gain a kind of influence over me which I could not master, and I told him my tale. When it was ended, he laughed long and loud. The rocks echoed back the sound. Hell seemed to be yelling around me. "Oh, thou cousin of Lucifer," said he. "So thou too hast fallen through thy pride, and, though bright as the sun of morning, thou art ready to give up thy good looks, thy bride, and thy well-being, rather than submit thee to the tyranny of good. I honor thy choice, by my soul. So thou hast fled and yield the day, and mean to starve on these rocks, and to let the birds peck out thy dead eyes, while thy enemy and thy betrothed rejoice in thy ruin. Thy pride is strangely akin to humility, methinks." As he spoke, 1,000 fanged thoughts stung me to the heart. "What would you that I should do?" I cried. "I? Oh, nothing, but lie down and say your prayers before you die. But were I you, I know the deed that should be done." I drew near him. His supernatural powers made him an oracle in my eyes, yet a strange, unearthly thrill quivered through my frame as I said, "Speak! Teach me! What act do you advise?" "Revenge thyself, man. Humble thine enemies. Set thy foot on the old man's neck, and possess thyself of his daughter." "To the east and west I turn," cried I, "and see no means. Had I gold, much could I achieve, but, poor and single, I am powerless." The dwarf had been seated on his chest as he listened to my story. Now he got off. He touched a spring. It flew open. What a mine of wealth, of blazing jewels, beaming gold, pale silver was displayed therein. A mad desire to possess this treasure was born within me. "Doubtless," said I, "one so powerful as you could do all things." "Nay," said the monster humbly, "I am less omnipotent than I seem. Some things I possess which you may covet, but I would give them all for a small share, or even a loan of what is yours." "My possessions are at your service," I replied bitterly. "My poverty, my exile, my disgrace, I make a free gift of them all." "Good, I thank you. Add one other thing to your gift, and my treasure is yours." "As nothing is my sole inheritance, what besides nothing would you have?" "Your comely face and well-made limbs." I shivered. Would this all-powerful monster murder me? I had no dagger. I forgot to pray, but I grew pale. "I ask for a loan, not a gift," said the frightful thing. "Lend me your body for 3 days. You shall have mine to cage your soul the while, and, in payment, my chest. What say you to the bargain? 3 short days." We are told that it is dangerous to hold unlawful talk, and well do I prove the same. Tamely written down, it may seem incredible that I should lend any ear to this proposition, but in spite of his unnatural ugliness, there was something fascinating in a being whose voice could govern earth, air, and sea. I felt a keen desire to comply, for with that chest I could command the world. My only hesitation resulted from a fear that he would not be true to his bargain. Then, I thought, I shall soon die here on these lonely sands, and the limbs he covets will be mine no more. It is worth the chance. And besides, I knew that, by all the rules of art magic, there were formula and oaths which none of its practicers dared break. I hesitated to reply, and he went on, now displaying his wealth, now speaking of the petty price he demanded, till it seemed madness to refuse. Thus is it. Place our bark in the current of the stream, and down, over fall and cataract it is hurried. Give up our conduct to the wild torrent of passion, and we are away, we know not whither. He swore many an oath, and I abjured him by many a sacred name, till I saw this wonder of power, this ruler of the elements, shiver like an autumn leaf before my words, and, as if the spirit spake unwillingly and perforce within him, at last, with broken voice, revealed the spell whereby he might be obliged, did he wish to play me false, to render up the unlawful spoil. Our warm life-blood must mingle to make and to mar the charm. Enough of this unholy theme. I was persuaded. The thing was done. The morrow dawned upon me as I lay upon the shingles, and I knew not my own shadow as it fell from me. I felt myself changed to a shape of horror, and cursed my easy faith and blind credulity. The chest was there the gold and precious stones for which I had sold the frame of flesh which nature had given me. The sight a little stilled my emotions. 3 days would soon be gone. They did pass. The dwarf had supplied me with a plenteous store of food. At first I could hardly walk, so strange and out of joint were all my limbs, and my voice, it was that of the fiend. But I kept silent, and turned my face to the sun that I might not see my shadow, and counted the hours, and ruminated on my future conduct. To bring Torella to my feet, to possess Juliet in spite of him, all this my wealth could easily achieve. During dark night I slept, and dreamt of the accomplishment of my desires. 2 suns had set. The 3rd dawned. I was agitated, fearful. Oh, expectation, what a frightful thing art thou, enkindled more by fear than hope! How dost thou twist thyself around the heart, torturing its pulsations? How dost thou dart unknown pangs all through our feeble mechanism, now seeming to shiver us like broken glass to nothingness, now giving us a fresh strength which can do nothing, and so torments us by a sensation such as the strong man must feel who cannot break his fetters, though they bend in his grasp. Slowly paced the bright, bright orb up in the eastern sky. Long it lingered in the zenith, and still more slowly wandered down the west. It touched the horizon's verge. It was lost. Its glories were on the summits of the cliff. They grew dun and gray. The evening star shone bright. He will soon be here. He came not. By the living heavens, he came not, and night dragged out its weary length, and in its decaying age, day began to grizzle its dark hair, and the sun rose again on the most miserable wretch that ever upbraided its light. 3 days thus I passed. The jewels and the gold, oh, how I abhorred them. I will not blacken these pages with demoniac ravings. All too terrible were the thoughts, the raging tumult of ideas that filled my soul. At the end of that time I slept. I had not before since the 3rd sunset, and I dreamt that I was at Juliet's feet, and she smiled, and then she shrieked, for she saw my transformation, and again she smiled, for still her beautiful lover knelt before her. But it was not I. It was he, the fiend, arrayed in my limbs, speaking with my voice, winning her with my looks of love. I strove to warn her, but my tongue refused its office. I strove to tear him from her, but I was rooted to the ground. I awoke with the agony. There were the solitary hoar precipices, there the plashing sea, the quiet strand, and the blue sky over all. What did it mean? Was my dream but a mirror of the truth? Was he wooing and winning my betrothed? I would on the instant back to Genoa, but I was banished. I laughed. The dwarf's yell burst from my lips. I? Banished? Oh, no. They had not exiled the foul limbs I wore. I might with these enter, without fear of incurring the threatened penalty of death, my own, my native city. I began to walk toward Genoa. I was somewhat accustomed to my distorted limbs. None were ever so ill adapted for straightforward movement. It was with infinite difficulty that I proceeded. Then, too, I desired to avoid all the hamlets strewn here and there on the sea beach, for I was unwilling to make a display of my hideousness. I was not quite sure that, if seen, the mere boys would not stone me to death as I passed, for a monster. Some ungentle salutations I did receive from the few peasants or fishermen I chanced to meet, but it was dark night before I approached Genoa. The weather was so balmy and sweet that it struck me that the Marchesa and his daughter would very probably have quitted the city for their country retreat. It was from Villa Torella that I had attempted to carry off Juliet. I had spent many an hour reconnoitering the spot and knew each inch of ground in its vicinity. It was beautifully situated, embosomed in trees on the margin of a stream. As I drew near, it became evident that my conjecture was right, nay, moreover, that the hours were being then devoted to feasting and merriment, for the house was lighted up. Strains of soft and gay music were wafted towards me by the breeze. My heart sank within me. Such was the generous kindness of Torella's heart that I felt sure that he would not have indulged in public manifestations of rejoicing just after my unfortunate banishment, but for a cause I dared not dwell upon. The country people were all alive and flocking about. It became necessary that I should study to conceal myself, and yet I longed to address someone, or to hear others discourse, or in any way to gain intelligence of what was really going on. At length, entering the walks that were in the immediate vicinity to the mansion, I found one dark enough to veil my excessive frightfulness, and yet others as well as I were loitering in its shade. I soon gathered all I wanted to know, all that first made my very heart die with horror and then boil with indignation. Tomorrow, Juliet was to be given to the penitent, reformed, beloved Guido. Tomorrow my bride was to pledge her vows to a fiend from hell, and I did this. My accursed pride, my demoniac violence and wicked self-idolatry had caused this act. For if I had acted as the wretch who had stolen my former form had acted, if, with a mien at once yielding and dignified, I had presented myself to Torella, saying, "I have done wrong, forgive me, I am unworthy of your angel child, but permit me to claim her hereafter, when my altered conduct shall manifest that I abjure my vices, and endeavor to become in some sort worthy of her. I go to serve against the infidels, and when my zeal for religion and my true penitence for the past shall appeal to you to cancel my crimes, permit me again to call myself your son." Thus had he spoken, and the penitent was welcomed, even as the prodigal son of Scripture. The fatted calf was killed for him, and he, still pursuing the same path, displayed such open-hearted regret for his follies, so humble a concession of all of his rights, and so ardent a resolve to reacquire them by a life of contrition and virtue, that he quickly conquered the kind old man, and full pardon and the gift of his lovely child followed in swift succession. Had an angel from paradise whispered to me to act thus. But now, what would be the innocent's Juliet fate? Would God permit the foul union, or, some prodigy destroying it, link the dishonored name of Carrega with the worst of crimes? Tomorrow at dawn they were to be married. There was but one way to prevent this, to meet mine enemy and to enforce the ratification of our agreement. I felt that this could only be done by a mortal struggle. I had no sword, if indeed my distorted arms could wield a soldier's weapon, but I had a dagger, and in that lay my every hope. There was no time for pondering or balancing nicely the question. I might die in the attempt, but besides the burning jealousy and despair of my own heart, honor, mere humanity, demanded that I should fall rather than not destroy the machinations of the fiend. The guests departed. The lights began to disappear. It was evident that the inhabitants of the villa were seeking repose. I hid myself among the trees. The garden grew desert. The gates were closed. I wandered round and came under a window. Well did I know the same. A soft twilight glimmered in the room. The curtains were half withdrawn. It was the temple of innocence and beauty. Its magnificence was tempered, as it were, by the slight disarrangements occasioned by its being dwelt in, and all the objects scattered around displayed the taste of her who hallowed it by her presence. I saw her enter with a quick, light step. I saw her approach the window. She drew back the curtain yet further and looked out into the night. Its breezy freshness played among her ringlets and wafted them from the transparent marble of her brow. She clasped her hands. She raised her eyes to heaven. I heard her voice. "Guido," she softly murmured. "Mine own Guido." And then, as if overcome by the fullness of her own heart, she sank on her knees, her upraised eyes, her negligent but graceful attitude, the beaming thankfulness that lighted up her face. Oh, these are tame words. Heart of mine, thou imagest ever, though thou canst not portray, the celestial beauty of that child of light and love. I heard a step, a quick, firm step along the shady avenue. Soon I saw a cavalier, richly dressed, young, and, methought, graceful to look on, advance. I hid myself yet closer. The youth approached. He paused beneath the window. She arose, and again looking out, she saw him and said, "I cannot. No, at this distant time I cannot record her terms of soft silver tenderness. To me they were spoken, but they were replied to by him." "I will not go," he cried. "Here where you have been, where your memory glides like some heaven-visiting ghost, I will pass the long hours till we meet, never, my Juliet, again, day or night, to part. But do thou, my love, retire. The cold morn and fitful breeze will make thy cheek pale, and fill with languor thy love-lighted eyes. Ah, sweetest! Could I press one kiss upon them, I could, methinks, repose." And then he approached still nearer, and methought he was about to clamber into her chamber. I had hesitated not to terrify her. Now I was no longer master of myself. I rushed forward. I threw myself on him. I tore him away. I cried, "Oh, loathsome and foul-shaped wretch!" I need not repeat epithets, all tending, as it appeared, to rail at a person I at present feel some partiality for. A shriek rose from Juliet's lips. I neither heard nor saw. I felt only mine enemy, whose throat I grasped, and my dagger's hilt. He struggled, but could not escape. At length, hoarsely, he breathed these words, "Do, strike home. Destroy this body. You will still live. May your life be long and merry." The descending dagger was arrested at the word, and he, feeling my hold relax, extricated himself and drew his sword, while the uproar in the house and flying of torches from one room to the other showed that soon we should be separated, and oh, far better to die so that he did not survive. I cared not. In the midst of my frenzy there was much calculation, fall as I might, and so that he did not survive, I cared not for the death blow I might deal against myself. While still, therefore, he thought I paused, and while I saw the villainous resolve to take advantage of my hesitation, in the sudden thrust he made at me, I threw myself on his sword, and at the same moment plunged my dagger with a true desperate aim in his side. We fell together, rolling over each other, and the tide of blood that flowed from the gaping wound of each mingled on the grass. More I know not. I fainted. Again I returned to life. Weak almost to death, I found myself stretched upon a bed. Juliet was kneeling beside it. Strange, my first broken request was for a mirror. I was so wan and ghastly that my poor girl hesitated, as she told me afterwards, but, by the mass, I thought myself a right proper youth when I saw the dear reflection of my own well-known features. I confess it is a weakness, but I avow it. I do entertain a considerable affection for the countenance and limbs I behold whenever I look at a glass, and have more mirrors in my house, and consult them oftener than any beauty in Venice. Before you too much condemn me, permit me to say that no one better knows than I the value of his own body, no one, probably, except myself, ever having had it stolen from him. Incoherently, I at first talked of the dwarf and his crimes, and reproached Juliet for her too easy admission of his love. She thought me raving, as well she might, and yet it was some time before I could prevail on myself to admit that the Guido whose penitence had won her back for me was myself, and while I cursed bitterly the monstrous dwarf, and blessed the well-directed blow that had deprived him of life, I suddenly checked myself when I heard her say, "Amen," knowing that him whom she reviled was my very self. A little reflection taught me silence. A little practice enabled me to speak of that frightful night without any very excessive blunder. The wound I had given myself was no mockery of one. It was long before I recovered, and as the benevolent and generous Torella sat beside me, talking such wisdom as might win friends to repentance, and mine own dear Juliet hovered near me, administering to my wants and cheering me by her smiles, the work of my bodily cure and mental reform went on together. I have never, indeed, wholly recovered my strength. My cheek is paler since, my person a little bent. Juliet sometimes ventures to allude bitterly to the malice that caused this change, but I kiss her on the moment and tell her all is for the best. I am a fonder and more faithful husband, and, true this is, but for that wound never had I called her mine. I did not revisit the seashore, nor seek for the fiend's treasure, yet while I ponder on the past, I often think, and my confessor was not backward in favoring the idea, that it might be a good rather than an evil spirit, sent by my guardian angel to show me the folly and misery of pride. So well at least did I learn this lesson, roughly taught as I was, that I am known now by all my friends and fellow citizens by the name of Guido il Cortese. The New Mother, written by Lucy Clifford. The children were always called Blue Eyes and the Turkey, and they came by the names in this manner. The elder one was like her dear father, who was far away at sea, and when the mother looked up she would often say, "Child, you have taken the pattern of your father's eyes," for the father had the bluest of blue eyes, and so gradually his little girl came to be called after them. The younger one had once, while she was still almost a baby, cried bitterly because a turkey that lived near to the cottage and sometimes wandered into the forest suddenly vanished in the middle of the winter, and, to console her, she had been called by its name. Now, the mother and Blue Eyes and the turkey and the baby all lived in a little lonely cottage at the edge of the forest. The forest was so near that the garden at the back seemed a part of it, and the tall fir trees were so close that their big black arms stretched over the little thatched roof, and when the moon shone upon them their tangled shadows were all over the whitewashed walls. It was a long way to the village, nearly a mile and a half, and the mother had to work hard and had not time to go often herself to see if there was a letter at the post office from the dear father. And so, very often in the afternoon, she used to send the two children. They were very proud of being able to go alone, and often ran half the way to the post office. When they came back, tired with the long walk, there would be the mother waiting and watching for them, and the tea would be ready, and the baby crowing with delight. And if by any chance there was a letter from the sea, then they were happy indeed. The cottage room was so cozy, the walls were as white as snow inside as well as out, and against them hung the cake tin and the baking dish and the lid of a large saucepan that had been worn out long before the children could remember, and the fish slice all polished and shining as bright as silver. On one side of the fireplace, above the bellows, hung the almanac, and on the other the clock that always struck the wrong hour and was always running down too soon. But it was a good clock, with a little picture on its face, and sometimes ticked away for nearly a week without stopping. The baby's high chair stood in one corner, and in another there was a cupboard hung up high against the wall, in which the mother kept all manner of little surprises. The children often wondered how the things that came out of that cupboard had got into it, for they seldom saw them put there. "Dear children," the mother said one afternoon late in the autumn, "it is very chilly for you to go to the village, but you must walk quickly, and who knows but what you may bring back a letter saying that dear father is already on his way to England." Then Blue Eyes and the turkey made haste and were soon ready to go. "Don't be long," the mother said, as she always did before they started. "Go the nearest way, and don't look at any strangers you meet, and be sure you do not talk with them." "No, mother," they answered. And then she kissed them and called them dear good children, and they joyfully started on their way. The village was gayer than usual, for there had been a fair the day before, and the people who had made merry still hung about the street, as if reluctant to own that their holiday was over. "I wish we had come yesterday," Blue Eyes said to the turkey. "Then we might have seen something." "Look there," said the turkey, and she pointed to a stall covered with gingerbread, but the children had no money. At the end of the street, close to the Blue Lion where the coaches stopped, an old man sat on the ground with his back resting against the wall of a house, and by him, with smart collars round their necks, were 2 dogs. Evidently they were dancing dogs, the children thought, and longed to see them perform, but they seemed as tired as their master, and sat quite still beside him, looking as if they had not even a single wag left in their tails. "Oh, I do wish we had been here yesterday," Blue Eyes said again as they went on to the grocer's, which was also the post office. The postmistress was very busy weighing out half-pounds of coffee, and when she had time to attend to the children, she only just said, "No letter for you today," and went on with what she was doing. Then Blue Eyes and the turkey turned away to go home. They went back slowly down the village street, past the man with the dogs again. One dog had roused himself and sat up rather crookedly, with his head a good deal on one side, looking very melancholy and rather ridiculous. But on the children went toward the bridge and the fields that led to the forest. They had left the village and walked some way, and then, just before they reached the bridge, they noticed, resting against a pile of stones by the wayside, a strange dark figure. At first they thought it was someone asleep, and then they thought it was a poor woman ill and hungry, and then they saw it was a strange wild-looking girl who seemed very unhappy, and they felt sure that something was the matter. So they went and looked at her, and thought they would ask her if they could do anything to help her, for they were kind children, and sorry indeed for anyone in distress. The girl seemed to be tall, and was about 15 years old. She was dressed in very ragged clothes. Round her shoulders there was an old brown shawl, which was torn at the corner that hung down the middle of her back. She wore no bonnet, and an old yellow handkerchief which she had tied around her head had fallen backwards and was all huddled up around her neck. Her hair was coal black and hung down uncombed and unfastened just anyhow. It was not very long, but it was very shiny and seemed to match her bright black eyes and dark freckled skin. On her feet were coarse gray stockings and thick shabby boots, which she had evidently forgotten to lace up. She had something hidden away under her shawl, but the children did not know what it was. At first they thought it was a baby, but when, on seeing them coming towards her, she carefully put it under her and sat upon it, they thought they must be mistaken. She sat watching the children approach, and did not move nor stir till they were within a yard of her. Then she wiped her eyes, just as if she had been crying bitterly, and looked up. The children stood still in front of her for a moment, staring at her and wondering what they ought to do. "Are you crying?" they asked shyly. To their surprise, she said in a most cheerful voice, "Oh, dear no, quite the contrary. Are you?" They thought it rather rude of her to reply in this way, for anyone could see they were not crying. They felt half in mind to walk away, but the girl looked at them so hard with her big black eyes they did not like to do so till they had said something else. "Perhaps you have lost yourself?" they said gently. But the girl answered promptly, "Certainly not. Why, you have just found me. Besides," she added, "I live in the village." The children were surprised at this, for they had never seen her before, and yet they thought they knew all the village folk by sight. "We often go to the village," they said, thinking it might interest her. "Indeed," she answered. That was all, and again they wondered what to do. Then the turkey, who had an inquiring mind, put a good, straightforward question. "What are you sitting on?" she asked. "On a pear drum," the girl answered, still speaking in a most cheerful voice, at which the children wondered, for she looked very cold and uncomfortable. "What is a pear drum?" they asked. I'm surprised at your not knowing, the girl answered. Most people in good society have one. And then she pulled it out and showed it to them. It was a curious instrument, a good deal like a guitar in shape. It had 3 strings, but only 2 pegs by which to tune them. The 3rd string was never tuned at all, and thus added to the singular effect produced by the village girl's music. And yet, oddly, the pear drum was not played by touching its strings, but by turning a little handle cunningly hidden on one side. But the strange thing about the pear drum was not the music it made, or the strings, or the handle, but a little square box attached to one side. The box had a little flat lid that appeared to open by a spring. That was all the children could make out at first. They were most anxious to see inside the box, or to know what it contained, but they thought it might look curious to say so. It really is a most beautiful thing, is a pear drum, the girl said, looking at it, and speaking in a voice that was almost affectionate. Where did you get it? The children asked. I bought it, the girl answered. Didn't it cost a great deal of money? They asked. Yes, answered the girl slowly, nodding her head. It cost a great deal of money. I am very rich, she added. And this the children thought a really remarkable statement, for they had not supposed that rich people dressed in old clothes or went about without bonnets. She might at least have done her hair, they thought, but they didn't like to say so. You don't look rich, they said slowly and in as polite a voice as possible. Perhaps not, the girl answered cheerfully. At this the children gathered courage and ventured to remark, You look rather shabby. They did not like to say ragged. Indeed, said the girl in the voice of one who had heard a pleasant but surprising statement. A little shabbiness is very respectable, she added in a satisfied voice. I must really tell them this, she continued, and the children wondered what she meant. She opened the little box by the side of the pear drum and said, just as if she were speaking to someone who could hear her, They say I look rather shabby. It is quite lucky, isn't it? Why, you are not speaking to anyone, they said, more surprised than ever. Oh dear, yes, I am speaking to them both. Both? They said, wondering. Yes, I have here a little man dressed as a peasant and wearing a wide slouch hat with a large feather, and a little woman to match, dressed in a red petticoat and a white handkerchief pinned across her bosom. I put them on the lid of the box, and when I play they dance most beautifully. The little man takes off his hat and waves it in the air, and the little woman holds up her petticoat a little bit on one side with one hand, and with the other she sends forward a kiss. Oh, let us see, the children cried, both at once. Then the village girl looked at them doubtfully. Let you see, she said slowly. Well, I'm not sure that I can. Tell me, are you good? Yes, yes, they answered eagerly. We are very good. Then it's quite impossible, she answered, and resolutely closed the lid of the box. They stared at her in astonishment. But we are good, they cried, thinking she must have misunderstood them. We are very good. Mother always says we are. So you remarked before, the girl said, speaking in a tone of decision. Still, the children did not understand. Then you can't let us see the little man and woman? They asked. Oh dear, no, the girl answered. I only show them to naughty children. To naughty children? They exclaimed. Yes, to naughty children, she answered. And the worse the children, the better do the man and woman dance. She put the pear drum carefully under her ragged cloak and prepared to go on her way. I really could not have believed that you were good, she said reproachfully, as if they had accused themselves of some great crime. Well, good day. Oh, but do show us the little man and woman, they cried. Certainly not. Good day, she said again. Oh, but we will be naughty, they said in despair. I'm afraid you couldn't, she answered, shaking her head. It requires a great deal of skill, especially to be naughty well. Good day, she said for the third time. Perhaps I shall see you in the village tomorrow. And swiftly she walked away, while the children felt their eyes fill with tears and their hearts ache with disappointment. If we had only been naughty, they said, we should have seen them dance. We should have seen the little woman holding her red petticoat in her hand, and the little man waving his hat. Oh, what shall we do to make her let us see them? Suppose, said the turkey, we try to be naughty today. Perhaps she would let us see them tomorrow. But, oh, said Blue Eyes, I don't know how to be naughty. No one ever taught me. The turkey thought for a few minutes in silence. I think I can be naughty if I try, she said. I'll try tonight. Then poor Blue Eyes burst into tears. Oh, don't be naughty without me, she cried. It would be so unkind of you. You know I want to see the little man and woman just as much as you do. You are very, very unkind. And she sobbed bitterly. And so, quarreling and crying, they reached their home. Now, when their mother saw them, she was greatly astonished, and, fearing they were hurt, ran to meet them. Oh, my children! Oh, my dear, dear children! She said. What is the matter? But they did not dare tell their mother about the village girl and the little man and woman, so they answered, Nothing is the matter. Nothing at all is the matter, and cried all the more. But why are you crying? She asked in surprise. Surely we may cry if we like, they sobbed. We are very fond of crying. Poor children, the mother said to herself. They are tired, and perhaps they are hungry. After tea they will be better. And she went back to the cottage and made the fire blaze until its reflection danced about on the tin lids upon the wall. And she put the kettle on to boil and set the tea things on the table and opened the window to let in the sweet fresh air and made all things look bright. Then she went to the little cupboard hung high up against the wall and took out some bread and put it on the table and said in a loving voice, Dear little children, come and have your tea. It is all quite ready for you. And see, there is the baby waking up from her sleep. We will put her in the high chair, and she will crow at us while we eat. But the children made no answer to the dear mother. They only stood still by the window and said nothing. Come, children, the mother said again. Come, Blue Eyes, and come, my turkey. Here is nice sweet bread for tea. Then Blue Eyes and the turkey looked around, and when they saw the tall loaf baked crisp and brown, and the little cups all in a row, and the jug of milk all waiting for them, they went to the table and sat down and felt a little happier. And the mother did not put the baby in the high chair after all, but took it on her knee and danced it up and down, and sang little snatches of songs to it, and laughed and looked content, and thought of the father far away at sea, and wondered what he would say to them when he came home again. Then suddenly she looked up and saw that the turkey's eyes were full of tears. Turkey, she exclaimed. My dear little turkey, what is the matter? Come to mother, my sweet, come to own mother. And putting the baby down on the rug, she held out her arms, and the turkey, getting up from her chair, ran swiftly into them. Oh, mother, she sobbed. Oh, dear mother, I do so want to be naughty. My dear child, the mother exclaimed. Yes, mother, the child sobbed more and more bitterly. I do so want to be very, very naughty. And then Blue Eyes left her chair also, and, rubbing her face against the mother's shoulder, cried sadly, And so do I, mother. Oh, I'd give anything to be very, very naughty. But my dear children, said the mother in astonishment, why do you want to be naughty? Because we do. Oh, what shall we do? They cried together. I should be very angry if you were naughty, but you could not be, for you love me, the mother answered. "Why couldn't we be naughty because we love you?" they asked. "Because it would make me very unhappy, and if you love me, you couldn't make me unhappy." "Why couldn't we?" they asked. Then the mother thought a while before she answered, and when she did so they hardly understood, perhaps because she seemed to be speaking rather to herself than to them. "Because if one loves well," she said gently, "one's love is stronger than all the bad feelings in one and conquers them. And this is the test whether love be real or false. Unkindness and wickedness have no power over it." "We don't know what you mean," they cried. "And we do love you, but we want to be naughty." "Then I should know you did not love me," the mother said. "And what should you do?" asked Blue Eyes. "I cannot tell. I should try to make you better." "But if you couldn't? If we were very, very, very naughty and wouldn't be good, what then?" "Then," said the mother sadly, and while she spoke her eyes filled with tears, and a sob almost choked her. "Then," she said, "I should have to go away and leave you, and to send home a new mother with glass eyes and wooden tail." "You couldn't!" they cried. "Yes, I could," she answered in a low voice, "but it would make me very unhappy, and I will never do it unless you are very, very naughty, and I am obliged." "We won't be naughty," they cried. "We will be good. We should hate a new mother, and she shall never come here." And they clung to their own mother and kissed her fondly. But when they went to bed, they sobbed bitterly, for they remembered the little man and woman and longed more than ever to see them. But how could they bear to let their own mother go away and a new one take her place? Part 2. "Good day," said the village girl when she saw Blue Eyes and the turkey approach. She was again sitting by the heap of stones, and under her shawl the pear drum was hidden. She looked just as if she had not moved since the day before. "Good day," she said, in the same cheerful voice in which she had spoken yesterday. "The weather is really charming." "Are the little man and woman there?" the children asked, taking no notice of her remark. "Yes, thank you for inquiring after them," the girl answered. "They are both here and quite well. The little man is learning how to rattle the money in his pocket, and the little woman has heard a secret. She tells it while she dances." "Oh, do let us see," they entreated. "Quite impossible, I assure you," the girl answered promptly. "You see, you are good." "Oh," said Blue Eyes sadly, "but mother says if we are naughty she will go away and send home a new mother with glass eyes and a wooden tail." "Indeed," said the girl, still speaking in the same unconcerned voice. "That is what they all say." "What do you mean?" asked the turkey. "They all threaten that kind of thing. Of course, there really are no mothers with glass eyes and wooden tails. They would be much too expensive to make." And the common sense of this remark the children, especially the turkey, saw at once, but they merely said, half crying, "We think you might let us see the little man and woman dance." "The kind of thing you would think," remarked the village girl. "But will you if we are naughty?" they asked in despair. "I fear you could not be naughty, that is, really, even if you tried," the girl said scornfully. "Oh, but we will try, we will indeed," they cried. "Do so show them to us." "Certainly not beforehand," answered the girl, getting up and preparing to walk away. "But if we are very naughty tonight, will you let us see them tomorrow?" "Questions asked today are always best answered tomorrow," the girl said, and turned round as if to walk on. "Good day," she said blithely. "I really must go and play a little to myself. Good day," she repeated, and then suddenly she began to sing. "Oh, sweet and fair's the lady bird, and so's the bumblebee, but I myself have long preferred the gentle chimpanzee, the gentle chimpanzee, the gentle I beg your pardon," she said, stopping and looking over her shoulder. "It's very rude to sing without leave before company. I won't do it again." "Oh, do go on," the children said. "I'm going," she said, and walked away. "No, we meant go on singing," they explained. "And do just let us hear you play," they entreated, remembering that as yet they had not yet heard a single sound from the pear drum. "Quite impossible," she called out as she went along. "You are good, as I remarked before. The pleasures of goodness centers in itself. The pleasures of naughtiness are many and varied. Good day," she shouted, for she was almost out of hearing. For a few minutes the children stood looking after her. Then they broke down and cried. "She might have let us see them," they sobbed. The turkey was the first to wipe away her tears. "Let us go home and be very naughty," she said. "Then perhaps she will let us see them tomorrow." "But what shall we do?" asked Blue Eyes, looking up. Then together all the way home they planned how to begin being naughty. And that afternoon the dear mother was sorely distressed, for, instead of sitting at their tea as usual with smiling happy faces, and then helping her to clear away and doing all she told them, they broke their mugs and threw their bread and butter on the floor, and when the mother told them to do one thing, they carefully went and did another, and as for helping her to put away, they left her to do it all by herself, and only stamped their feet with rage when she told them to go upstairs until they were good. "We won't be good," they cried. "We hate being good, and we always mean to be naughty. We like being naughty very much." "Do you remember what I told you I should do if you were very, very naughty?" she asked sadly. "Yes, we know, but it isn't true," they cried. "There is no mother with a wooden tail and glass eyes, and if there was, we should just stick pins into her and send her away. But there is none." Then the mother became really angry at last and sent them off to bed. But instead of crying and being sorry at her anger, they laughed for joy, and when they were in bed they sat up and sang merry songs at the top of their voices. The next morning, quite early, without asking leave from the mother, the children got up and ran off as fast as they could over the fields towards the bridge to look for the village girl. She was sitting as usual by the heap of stones with the pear drum under her shawl. "Now please show us the little man and woman," they cried, "and let us hear the pear drum. We were very naughty last night." But the girl kept the pear drum carefully hidden. "We were very naughty," the children cried again. "Indeed," she said, in precisely the same tone in which she had spoken yesterday. "But we were," they repeated. "We were indeed." "So you say," she answered. "You were not half naughty enough." "Why, we were sent to bed." "Just so," said the girl, putting the other corner of the shawl over the pear drum. "If you had been really naughty, you wouldn't have gone. But you can't help it, you see. As I remarked before, it requires a great deal of skill to be naughty well." But we broke our mugs. We threw our bread and butter on the floor. We did everything we could to be tiresome." "Mere trifles," answered the village girl scornfully. "Did you throw cold water on the fire? Did you break the clock? Did you pull all the tins down from the walls and throw them on the floor?" "No," exclaimed the children, aghast. "We did not do that." "I thought not," the girl answered. "So many people mistake a little noise and foolishness for real naughtiness, but, as I remarked before, it wants skill to do the thing properly. Well, good day." And before they could say another word, she had vanished. "We'll be much worse," the children cried in despair. "We'll go and do all the things she says." And then they went home and did all those things. They threw water on the fire, they pulled down the baking dish and the cake tin, the fish slice and the lid of the saucepan they had never seen, and banged them on the floor. They broke the clock and danced on the butter. They turned everything upside down, and then they sat still and wondered if they were naughty enough. And when Mother saw all that they had done, she did not scold them as she had the day before or send them to bed, but she just broke down and cried and looked at the children and said sadly, Unless you are good tomorrow, my poor blue eyes in turkey, I shall indeed have to go away and come back no more, and the new mother I told you of will come to you." They did not believe her, yet their hearts ached when they saw how unhappy she looked, and they thought within themselves that when they once had seen the little man and woman dance, they would be good to the dear mother forever afterwards. But they could not be good now till they had heard the sound of the pear drum, seen the little man and woman dance, and heard the secret told. Then they would be satisfied. The next morning, before the birds were stirring, before the sun had climbed high enough to look in at their bedroom window, or the flowers had wiped their eyes ready for the day, the children got up and crept out of the cottage and ran across the fields. They did not think the village girl would be up so very early, but their hearts had ached so much at the sight of the mother's sad face that they had not been able to sleep, and they longed to know if they had been naughty enough, and if they might just once hear the pear drum and see the little man and woman, and then go home and be good forever. To their surprise, they found the village girl sitting by the heap of stones, just as if it were her natural home. They ran fast when they saw her, and they noticed that the box containing the little man and woman was open, but she closed it quickly when she saw them, and they heard the clicking of the spring that kept it fast. "We have been very naughty," they cried. "We have done all the things you told us. Now, will you show us the little man and woman?" The girl looked at them curiously, then drew the yellow silk handkerchief she sometimes wore round her head out of her pocket and began to smooth out the creases in it with her hands. "You really seem quite excited," she said in her usual voice. "You should be calm. Calmness gathers in and hides things like a big cloak, or like my shawl does here, for instance," and she looked down at the ragged covering that hid the pear drum. "We have done all the things you told us," the children cried again, "and we do so long to hear the secret." But the girl only went on smoothing out her handkerchief. "I am so very particular about my dress," she said. They could hardly listen to her in their excitement. "But do tell if we may see the little man and woman," they entreated again. "We have been so very naughty, and Mother says she will go away today and send home a new mother if we are not good." "Indeed," said the girl, beginning to be interested and amused. "The things that people say are most singular and amusing. There is an endless variety in language." But the children did not understand, only entreated once more to see the little man and woman. "Well, let me see," the girl said at last, just as if she were relenting. "When did your mother say she would go?" "But if she goes, what shall we do?" they cried in despair. "We don't want her to go. We love her very much. Ah, what shall we do if she goes?" "People go and people come. First they go and then they come. Perhaps she will go before she comes. She couldn't come before she goes. You had better go back and be good," the girl answered suddenly. "You are really not clever enough to be anything else, and the little woman's secret is very important. She never tells it for make-believe naughtiness." "But we did do all the things you told us," the children cried despairingly. "You didn't throw the looking-glass out of window or stand the baby on its head." "No, we didn't do that," the children gasped. "I thought not," the girl said triumphantly. "Well, good day. I shall not be here tomorrow. Good day." "Oh, but don't go away," they cried. "We are so unhappy. Do let us see them just once." "Well, I shall go past your cottage at 11 o'clock this morning," the girl said. "Perhaps I shall play the pear drum as I go by." "And will you show us the man and woman?" they asked. "Quite impossible unless you have really deserved it. Make-believe naughtiness is only spoilt goodness. Now, if you break the looking-glass and do the things that are desired—" "Oh, we will," they cried. "We will be very naughty till we hear you coming." "It's a waste of time, I fear," the girl said politely. "But of course I should not like to interfere with you. You see, the little man and woman, being used to the best society, are very particular. Good day," she said, just as she always said, and then quickly turned away. But she looked back and called out, 11 o'clock. I shall be quite punctual. I am very particular about my engagements." Then again the children went home and were naughty, oh so very, very naughty that the dear mother's heart ached and her eyes filled with tears, and at last she went upstairs and slowly put on her best gown and her new sunbonnet, and she dressed the baby in all its Sunday clothes, and then she came down and stood before Blue Eyes and the turkey. And just as she did so, the turkey threw the looking-glass out of window, and it fell with a loud crash upon the ground. "Goodbye, my children," the mother said, sadly kissing them. "Goodbye, my Blue Eyes. Goodbye, my turkey. The new mother will be home presently. Oh, my poor children." And then, weeping bitterly, the mother took the baby in her arms and turned to leave the house. "But, mother," the children cried, "we are—" And then suddenly the broken clock struck 10:30, and they knew that in half an hour the village girl would come playing on the pear drum. "But, mother, we will be good at 11:30. Come back at 11:30, they cried, "and we'll both be good. We will indeed. We must be naughty till 11 o'clock. But the mother only picked up the little bundle in which she had tied up her cotton apron and a pair of old shoes, and went slowly out at the door. It seemed as if the children were spellbound and they could not follow her. They opened the window wide and called after her, "Mother, mother, oh dear mother, come back again. We will be good. We will be good now. We will be good forevermore if you will come back." But the mother only looked round and shook her head, and they could see the tears falling down her cheeks. "Come back, dear mother," cried Blue Eyes, but still the mother went on across the fields. Come back, cried the turkey, but still the mother went on. Just by the corner of the field she stopped and turned and waved her handkerchief, all wet with tears, to the children at the window. She made the baby kiss its hand, and in a moment mother and baby had vanished from their sight. Then the children felt their hearts ache with sorrow, and they cried bitterly just as the mother had done, and yet they could not believe that she had gone. Surely she would come back, they thought. She would not leave them altogether. But oh, if she did, if she did, if she did! And then the broken clock struck 11, and suddenly there was a sound, a quick, clanging, jangling sound, with a strange discordant one at intervals, and they looked at each other while their hearts stood still, for they knew it was the pear drum. They rushed to the open window, and there they saw the village girl coming toward them from the fields, dancing along and playing as she did so. Behind her, walking slowly, and yet ever keeping the same distance from her, was the man with the dogs whom they had seen asleep by the Blue Lion on the day they first saw the girl with the pear drum. He was playing on a flute that had a strange shrill sound. They could hear it plainly above the jangling of the pear drum. After the man followed the two dogs, slowly waltzing round and round on their hind legs. "We have done all you told us," the children called when they had recovered from their astonishment. "Come and see, and now show us the little man and woman." The girl did not cease her playing or her dancing, but she called out in a voice that was half speaking, half singing, and seemed to keep time to the strange music of the pear drum. "You did it all badly. You threw the water on the wrong side of the fire. The tin things were not quite in the middle of the room. The clock was not broken enough. You did not stand the baby on its head." Then the children, still standing spellbound by the window, cried out, entreating and wringing their hands, "Oh, but we have done everything you told us, and Mother is gone away. Show us the little man and woman now, and let us hear the secret." As they said this, the girl was just in front of the cottage, but she did not stop playing. The sound of the strings seemed to go through their hearts. She did not stop dancing. She was already passing the cottage by. She did not stop singing, and all she said sounded like part of a terrible song. And still the man followed her, always at the same distance, playing shrilly on his flute. And still the two dogs waltzed round and round after him, their tails motionless, their legs straight, their collars clear and white and stiff. On they went, all of them together. "Oh, stop," the children cried, "and show us the little man and woman now." But the girl sang out loud and clear, while the string that was out of tune twanged above her voice. "The little man and woman are far away. See, their box is empty." And then for the first time the children saw that the lid of the box was raised and hanging back, and that no little man and woman were in it. "I am going to my own land," the girl sang, "to the land where I was born." And she went on toward the long straight road that led to the city many miles away. But our mother is gone," the children cried. "Our dear mother, will she ever come back?" "No," sang the girl. "She'll never come back, she'll never come back. I saw her by the bridge. She took a boat upon the river. She is sailing to the sea. She will meet your father once again, and they will go sailing on to the countries far away." And when they heard this, the children cried out, but could say no more, for their hearts seemed to be breaking. Then the girl, her voice getting fainter and fainter in the distance, called out once more to them. And but for the dread that sharpened their ears, they would hardly have heard her, so far away was she, and so discordant was the music. "Your new mother is coming. She is already on her way, but she only walks slowly, for her tail is rather long, and her spectacles are left behind. But she is coming, she is coming, coming, coming." The last word died away. It was the last one they ever heard the village girl utter. On she went, dancing on, and on followed the man. They could see that he was still playing, but they could no longer hear the sound of his flute, and on went the dogs, round and round and round. On they all went, further and further away, till they were separate things no more, till they were just a confused mass of faded color, till they were a dark, misty object that nothing could define, till they had vanished altogether, and forever. Then the children turned and looked at each other and at the little cottage home that only a week before had been so bright and happy, so cozy and so spotless. The fire was out, and the water was still among the cinders. The baking dish and cake tin, the fish slice and the saucepan lid, which the dear mother used to spend so much time in rubbing, were all pulled down from the nails on which they had hung so long and were lying on the floor. And there was the clock all broken and spoilt. The little picture upon its face could be seen no more, and though it sometimes struck a stray hour, it was with the tone of a clock whose hours are numbered. And there was the baby's high chair, but no little baby to sit in it. There was the cupboard on the wall, and never a sweet loaf on its shelf. And there were the broken mugs, and the bits of bread tossed about, and the greasy boards which the mother had knelt down to scrub until they were white as snow. In the midst of all stood the children, looking at the wreck they had made, their hearts aching, their eyes blinded with tears, and their poor little hands clasped together in their misery. "Oh, what shall we do?" cried Blue Eyes. "I wish we had never seen the village girl and the nasty, nasty pear drum." "Surely Mother will come back," sobbed the turkey. "I'm sure we shall die if she doesn't come back." "I don't know what we shall do if the new mother comes," cried Blue Eyes. "I shall never, never like any other mother. I don't know what we shall do if that dreadful mother comes." "We won't let her in," said the turkey. "But perhaps she'll walk in," sobbed Blue Eyes. Then Turkey stopped crying for a minute to think what should be done. "We will bolt the door," she said, "and shut the window, and we won't take any notice when she knocks." So they bolted the door and shut the window and fastened it. And then, in spite of all they had said, they felt naughty again and longed after the little man and woman they had never seen, far more than after the mother who had loved them all their lives. But then they did not really believe that their own mother would not come back, or that any new mother would take her place. When it was dinner time, they were very hungry, but they could only find some stale bread, and they had to be content with it. "Oh, I wish we heard the little woman's secret," cried the turkey. "I wouldn't have cared then." All through the afternoon they sat watching and listening for fear of the new mother, but they saw and heard nothing of her, and gradually they became less and less afraid lest she should come. Then they thought that perhaps when it was dark their own dear mother would come home, and perhaps if they asked her to forgive them she would. And then Blue Eyes thought that if their mother did come, she would be very cold. So they crept out at the back door and gathered in some wood, and at last, for the grate was wet and it was a great deal of trouble to manage it, they made a fire. When they saw the bright fire burning and the little flames leaping and playing among the wood and coal, they began to be happy again and to feel certain that their own mother would return, and the sight of the pleasant fire reminded them of all the time she had waited for them to come from the post office, and of how she had welcomed them and comforted them and given them nice warm tea and sweet bread and talked to them. Oh, how sorry they were they had been naughty, and for that nasty village girl. They did not care a bit about the little man and woman now, nor want to hear the secret. They fetched a pail of water and washed the floor. They found some rag and rubbed the tins till they looked bright again, and, putting a footstool on a chair, they got up on it very carefully and hung up the things in their places. Then they picked up the broken mugs and made the room as neat as they could, till it looked more and more as if the dear mother's hands had been busy about it. They felt more and more certain she would return, she and the dear little baby together, and they thought they would set the tea things for her, just as she had so often set them for her naughty children. They took down the tea tray and got out the cups and put the kettle on the fire to boil and made everything look as homelike as they could. There was no sweet loaf to put on the table, but perhaps the mother would bring something from the village, they thought. At last all was ready, and Blue Eyes and the turkey washed their faces and their hands, and then sat and waited, for of course they did not believe what the village girl had said about their mother sailing away. Suddenly, while they were sitting by the fire, they heard a sound as if something heavy was being dragged along the ground outside. And then there was a loud and terrible knocking at the door. The children felt their hearts stand still. They knew it could not be their own mother, for she would have turned the handle and tried to come in without any knocking at all. "Oh, Turkey," whispered Blue Eyes, "if it should be the new mother, what shall we do?" "We won't let her in," whispered the turkey, for she was afraid to speak aloud, and again there came the long and loud and terrible knocking at the door. "What shall we do? Oh, what shall we do?" cried the children in despair. "Go away," they called out. "Oh, go away. We won't let you in. We will never be naughty any more. Go away, go away." But again there came a loud and terrible knocking. "She'll break the door if she knocks so hard," cried Blue Eyes. "Go and put your back to it," whispered the turkey, "and I'll peep out of the window to see if it's really the new mother." So, in fear and trembling, Blue Eyes put her back against the door, and the turkey went to the window and, pressing her face against one side of the frame, peeped out. She could just see a black satin poke bonnet with a frill round the edge and a long, bony arm carrying a black leather bag. From beneath the bonnet there flashed a strange bright light, and Turkey's heart sank and her cheeks turned pale, for she knew it was the flashing of two glass eyes. She crept up to Blue Eyes. "It is, it is, it is," she whispered, her voice shaking with fear. "It is the new mother. She has come and brought her luggage in a black leather bag that is hanging on her arm." "Oh, what shall we do?" wept Blue Eyes. And again there was the terrible knocking. "Come and put your back against the door too, Turkey," cried Blue Eyes. "I'm afraid it will break." So together they stood with their two little backs against the door. There was a long pause. They thought perhaps the new mother had made up her mind that there was no one at home to let her in and would go away. But presently the two children heard through the thin wooden door the new mother move a little and then say to herself, "I must break open the door with my tail." For one terrible moment all was still, but in it the children could almost hear her lift up her tail, and then, with a fearful blow, the little painted door was cracked and splintered. With a shriek the children darted from the spot and fled through the cottage and out at the back door into the forest beyond. All night long they stayed in the darkness and the cold, and all the next day and the next, and all through the cold, dreary days and the long, dark nights that followed. They are there still, my children. All through the long weeks and months have they been there, with only the green rushes for their pillows, and only the brown dead leaves to cover them, feeding on the wild strawberries in the summer, or on the nuts when they hang green, on the blackberries when they are no longer sour in the autumn, and in the winter on the little red berries that ripen in the snow. They wander about among the tall, dark fir trees, or beneath the great trees beyond. Sometimes they stay to rest beside the little pool near the copse where the ferns grow the thickest, and they long and long with a longing that is greater than words can say to see their own dear mother again, just once again, to tell her they'll be good forevermore, just once again. And still the new mother stays in the little cottage, but the windows are closed and the doors are shut, and no one knows what the inside looks like. Now and then, when the darkness has fallen and the night is still, hand in hand, Blue Eyes and the turkey creep up near to the home in which they once were so happy, and with beating hearts they watch and listen. Sometimes a blinding flash comes through the window, and they know it is the light from the new mother's glass eyes. Or they hear a strange muffled noise, and they know it is the sound of her wooden tail as she drags it along the floor. The Woman at Seven Brothers by Wilbur Daniel Steele. I tell you, sir, I was innocent. I didn't know any more about the world at 22 than some do at 12. My uncle and aunt in Duxbury brought me up strict. I studied hard in high school, I worked hard after hours, and I went to church twice on Sundays, and I can't see it's right to put me in a place like this with crazy people. Yes, I know they're crazy. You can't tell me. And as for what they said in court about finding her with her husband, that's the inspector's lie, sir, because he's down on me and wants to make it look like my fault. No, sir, I can't say as I thought she was handsome, not at first. For one thing, her lips were too thin and white, and her color was bad. I'll tell you for a fact, sir, that first day I came off to the light, I was sitting in my cot in the storeroom, that's where the assistant keeper sleeps at the Seven Brothers, as lonesome as I could be, away from home for the first time, and the water all around me, and even though it was a calm day, pounding enough on the ledge to send a kind of woom, 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 winding up through all the solid rock of the tower. And when old Fedderson poked his head down from the living room with the sunshine above making a kind of bright frame around his hair and his whiskers to give me a cheery, "Make yourself to home, son," I remember I said to myself, he's all right. I'll get along with him. But his wife's enough to sour milk. That was queer, because she was so much under him in age, long about 28 or so, and him nearer 50. But that's what I said, sir. Of course that feeling wore off, same as any feeling will wear off sooner or later in a place like the Seven Brothers. Cooped up in a place like that, you come to know folks so well that you forget what they do look like. There was a long time I never noticed her, any more than you notice the cat. We used to sit of an evening around the table, as if you were Fedderson there, and me here, and her somewhere back there in the rocker, knitting. Fedderson would be working on his Jacob's ladder, and I'd be reading. He'd been working on that Jacob's ladder a year, I guess, and every time the inspector came off with the tender, he was so astonished to see how good that ladder was that the old man would go to work and make it better. That's all he lived for. If I was reading, as I say, I daren't take my eyes off the book, or Fedderson had me. And then he'd begin. What the inspector said about him, how surprised the members of the board had been that time to see everything so clean about the light, what the inspector had said about Fedderson's being stuck here in a second-class light, best keeper on the coast, and so on and so on and so on, till either he or I had to go aloft and have a look at the wicks. He'd been there 23 years, all told, and he'd got used to that feeling that he was kept down unfair. So used to it, I guess, that he'd fed on it and told himself how folks ashore would talk when he was dead and gone, best keeper on the coast, kept down unfair. And not that he said that to me. Nah, he was far too loyal and humble and respectful, doing his duty without complaint, as anybody could see. And all that time, night after night, hardly ever a word out of the woman. As I remember it, she seemed more like a piece of furniture than anything else, not even a very good cook, nor over and above tidy. One day, when he and I were trimming the lamp, he passed the remark that his first wife used to dust the lens and take a pride in it. Not that he had a word against Anna, though. He never said a word against any living mortal. He was too upright. I don't know how it came about. Or rather, I do know, but it was so sudden and so far away from my thoughts that it shocked me, like the world turned over. It was at prayers. That night, I remember, Fedderson was uncommon long-winded. We'd had a batch of newspapers out by the tender, and such times the old man always made a long watch of it, getting the world straightened out. For one thing, the United States minister to Turkey was dead. Well, from him and his soul, Fedderson got on to Turkey and the Presbyterian College there, and from that to heathen in general, and he rambled on and on like the surf on the ledge, woom, 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 never coming to an end. And you know how you'll be at prayers sometimes. My mind strayed. I counted the canes in the chair seat where I was kneeling. I played at the corner of the tablecloth between my fingers for a spell, and by my eyes went wandering up the back of the chair. The woman, sir, was looking at me. Her chair was back to mine, close, and both our heads were down there by the shadow under the edge of the table, with Fedderson clear over on the other side by the stove, and there were her 2 eyes hunting mine between the spindles in the shadow. You won't believe me, sir, but I tell you I felt like jumping to my feet and running out of the room. It was so queer. I don't know what her husband was praying about after that. His voice didn't mean anything, no more than the seas on the ledge away down there. I went to work to count the canes in the seat again, but all my eyes were in the top of my head. It got so I couldn't stand it. We were at the Lord's Prayer, saying it sing-song together when I had to look up again, and there her 2 eyes were between the spindles, hunting mine, and just then all of us were saying, "Forgive us our trespasses." I thought of it afterward. When we got up, she was turned the other way, but I couldn't help seeing her cheeks were red. It was terrible. I wondered if Fedderson would notice, though I might have known he wouldn't, not him. He was in too much of a hurry to get at his Jacob's ladder, and then he had to tell me for the 10th time what the inspector had said that day about getting him another light. Kingdom come, maybe, he said. I made some excuse or another and got away. Once in the storeroom, I sat down on my cot and I stayed there a long time, feeling queerer than anything. I read a chapter in the Bible, I don't know why. After I got my boots off, I sat with them in my hands for as much as an hour, I guess, staring at the oil tank and its lopsided shadow on the wall. I tell you, sir, I was shocked. I was only 22, remember, and I was shocked and horrified. And when I did turn in, finally, I didn't sleep at all well. 2 or 3 times I came to, sitting straight up in bed. Once I got up and opened the outer door to have a look. The water was like glass, dim, without a breath of wind, and the moon just going down. Over on the black shore I made out 2 lights in a village, like a pair of eyes watching. Lonely? My, yes, lonely and nervous. I had a horror of her, sir. The dinghy boat hung on its davits just there in front of the door, and for a minute I had an awful hankering to just climb into it, lower away, and row off, no matter where. It sounds foolish. Well, it seemed foolish next morning, with the sun shining and everything as usual, Fedderson sucking his pen and wagging his head over his eternal log, and his wife down in the rocker with her head in the newspaper and her breakfast work still waiting. I guess that jarred it out of me more than anything else, sight of her slouched down there, with her stringy yellow hair and her dusty apron and the pale back of her neck, reading the society notes. Society notes. Think of it. For the first time since I came to Seven Brothers, I wanted to laugh. I guess I did laugh when I went aloft to clean the lamp and found everything so free and breezy, gulls flying high and little white caps making under a westerly. It was like feeling a big load dropped off your shoulders. Fedderson came up with his dust rag and cocked his head at me. "What's the matter, Ray?" said he. "Nothing," said I. And then I couldn't help it. "Seems kind of out of place for society notes," said I. "Out here at Seven Brothers." He was the other side of the lens, and when he looked at me, he had 1,000 eyes, all sober. For a minute I thought he was going on dusting, but then he came out and he sat down on a sill. "Sometimes," said he, "I get to thinking it may be a mite dull for her out here. She's pretty young, Ray. Not much more'n a girl, hardly." "Not much more'n a girl?" It gave me a turn, sir, as though I'd seen my aunt in short dresses. "It's a good home for her, though," he went on, slow. "I've seen a lot worse ashore, Ray. Of course, if I could get a shore light—" "Kingdom Come's a shore light." He looked at me out of his deep-set eyes, and then he turned them around the light room where he'd been so long. "Nah," said he, wagging his head. "It ain't for such as me. I never saw so humble a man. But look here," he went on, more cheerful. "As I was telling her just now, a month from yesterday is our 4th anniversary, and I'm going to take her ashore for the day and give her a holiday, new hat and everything. A girl wants a mite of excitement now and then, Ray." There it was again, that girl. It gave me the fidgets, sir. I had to do something about it. It's close quarters for last name and a light, and I'd take to calling him Uncle Matt soon after I came. Now, when I was at table that noon, I spoke over to where she was standing by the stove, getting him another help of chowder. "I guess I'll have some too, Aunt Anna," said I, matter of fact. She never said a word nor gave a sign, just stood there kind of round-shouldered, dipping the chowder. And that night at prayers, I hitched my chair around the table with its back the other way. You get awful lazy in a lighthouse some ways. No matter how much tinkering you've got, there's still a lot of time, and there's such a thing as too much reading. The changes in weather get monotonous too by and by. The light burns the same on a thick night as it does on a fair one. Of course, there's the ships, northbound, southbound, windjammers, freighters, passenger boats full of people. In the watches at night, you can see their lights go by and wonder what they are, how they're laden, where they'll fetch up and all. I used to do that almost every evening when it was my first watch, sitting out on the walk-around up there with my legs hanging over the edge and my chin propped on the railing. Lazy. The Boston boat was the prettiest to see, with her 3 tiers of portholes lit like a string of pearls wrapped round and round a woman's neck. Well away, too, for the ledge must have made a couple 100 fathoms off the light, like a white dog-tooth of a breaker, even on the darkest night. Well, I was lolling there one night, as I say, watching the Boston boat go by, not thinking of anything special, when I heard the door on the other side of the tower open and footsteps coming around to me. By and by I nodded toward the boat and passed the remark that she was fetching in uncommon close tonight. No answer. I made nothing of that, for oftentimes Fedderson wouldn't answer, and after I'd watched the lights crawling through the darkest spell, just to make conversation, I said I'd guessed there'd be a bit of weather before long. "I've noticed," said I, "that when there's weather coming on, and the wind in the northeast, you can hear the orchestra playing aboard of her just over there. I make it out now. Do you?" "Yes. Oh, yes. I hear it all right." "You can imagine," I started. "It wasn't him, but her. And there was something in the way she said that speech, sir, something, well, unnatural, like a hungry animal snapping at a person's hand." I turned and looked at her sidewise. She was standing by the railing, leaning a little outward, the top of her from the waist picked out bright by the lens behind her. I didn't know what in the world to say, and yet I had a feeling I ought not to sit there mum. "I wonder," said I, "what that captain's thinking of, fetching in so handy tonight. It's no way, I tell you. 'Twasn't for this light, she'd go to work and pile up the ledge some thick night." She turned at that and stared straight into the lens. I didn't like the look of her face. Somehow, with its edges cut hard all around and its 2 eyes closed down to slits like a cat's, it made a kind of mask. "And then," I went on, uneasy enough, "and then where'd all their music be of a sudden, and their goings-on, and their singing, and dancing?" She clipped me off so quick it took my breath. Dancing?" said I. "That's dance music," said she. She was looking at the boat again. "How do you know?" I felt I had to keep on talking. "Well, sir," she laughed. I looked at her. She had on a shawl of some stuff or other that shined in the light. She had it pulled tight around her with her 2 hands in front at her breast, and I saw her shoulders swaying in tune. How do I know? She cried. Then she laughed again, the same kind of laugh. It was queer, sir, to see her and to hear her. She turned quick as that and leaned toward me. Don't you know how to dance, Ray? Said she. No, I managed, and I was going to say Aunt Anna, but the thing choked in my throat. I tell you, she was looking square at me all the time with her 2 eyes and moving with the music as if she didn't know it. By heavens, sir, it came over me all of a sudden that she wasn't so bad looking after all. I guess I must have sounded like a fool. You see, said I. She's cleared the rip there now, and the music's gone. You hear? Yes, said she, turning back slow. That's where it stops every night. Night after night. It stops just there at the rip. When she spoke again, her voice was different. I'd never heard the like of it, thin and taut as a thread. It made me shiver, sir. I hate 'em, that's what she said. I hate 'em all. I'd like to see 'em dead. I'd love to see 'em torn apart on the rocks night after night. I could bathe my hands in their blood night after night. And do you know, sir, I saw it with my own eyes, her hands moving in each other above the rail. But it was her voice, though. I didn't know what to do or what to say, so I poked my head through the railing and looked down at the water. I don't think I'm a coward, sir, but it was like a cold, ice-cold hand taking hold of my beating heart. When I looked up finally, she was gone. By and by I went in and had a look at the lamp, hardly knowing what I was about. Then, seeing by my watch it was time for the old man to come on duty, I started to go below. In the Seven Brothers, you understand, the stair goes down in a spiral through a well against the south wall, and first there's the door to the keeper's room, and then you come to another, and that's the living room, and then down to the storeroom, and at night, if you don't carry a lantern, it's as black as the pit. Well, down I went, sliding my hand along the rail, and as usual I stopped to give a rap on the keeper's door in case he was taking a nap after supper. Sometimes he did. I stood there, blind as a bat, with my mind still up on the walk-around. There was no answer to my knock. I hadn't expected any. Just from habit, and with my right foot already hanging down for the next step, I reached out to give the door one more tap for luck. Do you know, sir, my hand didn't fetch up on anything. The door had been there a second before, and now the door wasn't there. My hand just went on going through the dark, on, and I didn't seem to have sense or power enough to stop it. There didn't seem any air in the well to breathe, and my ears were drumming to the surf. That's how scared I was, and my hand touched the flesh of a face, and something in the dark said, "Oh," no louder than a sigh. Next thing I knew, sir, I was down in the living room, warm and yellow lit, with Fedderson cocking his head at me across the table where he was at that eternal Jacob's ladder of his. "What's the matter, Ray?" said he. "Lord's sake, Ray!" "Nothing," said I. Then I think I told him I was sick. That night I wrote a letter to A.L. Peters, the grain dealer in Duxbury, asking for a job. Even though it wouldn't go ashore for a couple of weeks, just the writing of it made me feel better. It's hard to tell you how those 2 weeks went by. I don't know why, but I felt like hiding in a corner all the time. I had to come to meals, but I didn't look at her, though not once, unless it was by accident. Fedderson thought I was still ailing and nagged me to death with advice and so on. One thing I took care not to do, I can tell you, and that was to knock on his door till I'd made certain he wasn't below in the living room, though I was tempted to. Yes, sir, that's a queer thing, and I wouldn't tell you if I hadn't set out to give you the truth. Night after night, stopping there on the landing in that black pit, the air gone out of my lungs and the surf drumming in my ears and the sweat standing cold on my neck and one hand lifting up in the air. God forgive me, sir. Maybe I did wrong not to look at her more, drooping about her work in her gingham apron with her hair stringing. When the inspector came off with the tender that time, I told him I was through. That's when he took the dislike to me, I guess, for he looked me kind of sneering and said, soft as I was, I'd have to put up with it till next relief. And then, said he, there'd be a whole house cleaning at Seven Brothers because he'd gotten Fedderson the berth at Kingdom Come, and with that he slapped the old man on the back. I wish you could have seen Fedderson, sir. He sat down on my cot as if his knees had given way. Happy? You'd think he'd be happy with all his dreams come true. Yes, he was happy, beaming all over. For a minute. Then, sir, he began to shrivel up. It was like seeing a man cut down in his prime before your eyes. He began to wag his head. No, said he. No, it's not for such as me. I'm good enough for 7 brothers, and that's all, Mr. Bayliss. That's all. And for all the inspector could say, that's what he stuck to. He'd figured himself a martyr so many years, nursed that injustice like a mother with her firstborn, sir, and now in his old age, so to speak, they weren't to rob him of it. Fedderson was going to wear out his life in a second-class light, and folks would talk. That was his idea. I heard him hailing down as the tender was casting off. See you tomorrow, Mr. Bayliss. Yep, coming ashore with the wife for a spree. Anniversary. Yep. But he didn't sound much like a spree. They had robbed him, partly, after all. I wondered what she thought about it. I didn't know till night. She didn't show up to supper, which Fedderson and I got ourselves. Had a headache, he said. It was my early watch. I went and lit up and came back to read a spell. He was finishing off the Jacob's Ladder and thoughtful, like a man that's lost a treasure. Once or twice I caught him looking about the room on the sly. It was pathetic, sir. Going up the second time, I stepped out on the walk-around to have a look at things. She was there, on the seaward side, wrapped in that silky thing. A fair sea was running across the ledge, and it was coming on a little thick, not too thick. Off to the right, the Boston boat was blowing woom, woom, creeping up on us, quarter speed. There was another fellow behind her in a fisherman's conch further ashore. I don't know why, but I stopped beside her and leaned on the rail. She didn't appear to notice me one way or another. We stood and we stood, listening to the whistles, and the longer we stood, the more it got on my nerves, her not noticing me. I suppose she'd been too much on my mind lately. I began to be put out. I scraped my feet. I coughed. By and by I said out loud, "Look here, I guess I better get the foghorn and give these fellas a toot." "Why?" said she, without moving her head, calm as that. Why? It gave me a turn, sir. For a minute I stared at her. Why? Because if she don't pick up this light before very many minutes, she'll be too close in to wear. Tide'll have her on the rocks, that's why. I couldn't see her face, but I could see one of her silk shoulders lift a little, like a shrug. And there I kept on staring at her, a dumb one, sure enough. And I know what brought me to was hearing the Boston boat's 3 sharp toots as she picked up the light, mad as anything, and swung her helm aport. I turned away from her, sweat stringing down my face, and walked around to the door. It was just as well, too, for the feed pipe was plugged in the lamp and the wicks were popping. She'd have been out in another 5 minutes, sir. When I'd finished, I saw that woman standing in the doorway. Her eyes were bright. I had a horror of her, sir, a living horror. "If only the light had been out," said she, low and sweet. "God forgive you," said I. "You don't know what you're saying." She went down the stair into the well, winding out of sight, and as long as I could see her, her eyes were watching mine. When I went myself, after a few minutes, she was waiting for me on that first landing, standing still in the dark. She took hold of my hand, though I tried to get it away. "Goodbye," said she in my ear. "Goodbye," said I. I didn't understand. "You heard what he said today, about kingdom come? Be it so, on his own head. I'll never come back here. Once I set foot ashore, I've got friends in Brightonborough, Ray." I got away from her and I started on down, but I stopped. "Brightonborough?" I whispered back. "Why do you tell me?" My throat was raw to the words, like a sore. "So you'd know," said she. Well, sir, I saw him off the next morning down that new Jacob's ladder into the dinghy boat, her in a dress of blue velvet and him in his best cutaway and derby, rowing away, smaller and smaller, the two of them. And then I went back and sat on my cot, leaving the door open and the ladder still hanging down the wall, along with the boat falls. I don't know whether it was relief or what. I suppose I must have been worked up even more than I'd thought those past weeks, for now it was all over, I was like a rag. I got down on my knees, sir, and prayed to God for the salvation of my soul, and when I got up and climbed to the living room, it was 12:30 by the clock. There was rain on the windows and the sea was running blue-black under the sun. I'd sat there all that time not knowing there was a squall. It was funny. The glass stood high, but those black squalls kept coming and going all afternoon while I was at work up in the light room. And I worked hard to keep myself busy. First thing I knew, it was 5 and no sign of the boat yet. It began to get dim and kind of purplish gray over the land. The sun was down. I lit up, made everything snug, and got out the night glasses to have another look for that boat. He'd said he intended to get back before 5. No sign. And then standing there, it came over me that of course he wouldn't be coming off. He'd be hunting her, poor old fool. Looked like I had to stand 2 men's watches that night. Never mind. I felt like myself again, even if I hadn't had any dinner or supper. Pride came to me that night on the walk around, watching the boats go by. Little boats, big boats, the Boston boat with all her pearls and her dance music. They couldn't see me. They didn't know who I was, but to the last of them they depended on me. They say a man must be born again. Well, I was born again. I breathed deep in the wind. Dawn broke, hard and red as a dying coal. I put out the light and started to go below. Born again, yes, sir. I felt so good I whistled in the well, and when I came to that first door in the stair, I reached out in the dark to give it a rap for luck, and then, sir, the hair prickled all over my scalp when I found my hand just going on and on through the air, the same as it had gone once before, and all of a sudden I wanted to yell because I thought I was going to touch flesh. It's funny what their just forgetting to close their door did to me, isn't it? Well, I reached for the latch and I pulled it to with a bang and ran down as if a ghost was after me. I got up some coffee and bread and bacon for breakfast. I drank the coffee, but somehow I couldn't eat all along of that open door. The light in the room was blood. I got to thinking. I thought how she'd talked about those men, women, and children on the rocks and how she'd made to bathe her hands over the rail. I almost jumped out of my chair then. It seemed for a wink she was there beside the stove watching me with that queer half-smile. Really, I seemed to see her for a flash across the red tablecloth in the red light of dawn. "Look here," said I to myself, sharp enough, and then I gave myself a good laugh and went below. And there I took a look out of the door, which was still open with the ladder hanging down. I made sure to see the poor old fool come pulling around the point before very long now. My boots were hurting a little, and taking them off, I lay down on the cot to rest, and somehow I went to sleep. I had horrible dreams. I saw her standing again in that blood-red kitchen, and she seemed to be washing her hands, and the surf on the ledge was winding up the tower louder and louder all the time, and what it whined was night after night, night after night. What woke me was cold water in my face. The storeroom was in gloom. That scared me at first. I thought night had come and remembered the light. But then I saw the gloom was of a storm. The floor was shining wet, and the water in my face was spray flung up through the open door. When I ran to close it, it almost made me dizzy to see the gray and white breakers marching past. The land was gone, the sky shut down heavy overhead, there was a piece of wreckage on the back of a swell, and the Jacob's ladder was carried clean away. How that sea had picked up so quick, I can't think. I looked at my watch and it wasn't 4 in the afternoon yet. When I closed the door, sir, it was almost dark in the storeroom. I'd never been in the light before in a gale of wind. I wondered why I was shivering so, till I found it was the floor below me shivering, and the walls, and the stair. Horrible crunchings and grindings ran away up the tower, and now and then there was a great thud somewhere, like a cannon shot in a cave. I tell you, sir, I was alone, and I was in a mortal fright for a minute or so. And yet I had to get myself together. There was the light up there not tended to, and an early dark coming on, and a heavy night and all, and I had to go, and I had to pass that door. You'll say it's foolish, sir. And maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was because I hadn't eaten. But I began thinking of that door up there the minute I set foot on the stair, and all the way up through that howling dark well I dreaded to pass it. I told myself I wouldn't stop. I didn't stop. I felt the landing underfoot, and I went on 4 steps, 5, and then I couldn't. I turned and went back. I put out my hand, and it went on into nothing. That door, sir, was open again. I left it be. I went on up into the light room and set to work. It was bedlam there, sir, screeching bedlam, but I took no notice. I kept my eyes down. I trimmed those 7 wicks, sir, as neat as ever they were trimmed. I polished the brass till it shone, and I dusted the lens. It wasn't till that was done that I let myself look back to see who was standing there, half out of sight in the well. It was her, sir. "Where'd you come from?" I asked. I remember my voice was sharp. "Up Jacob's ladder," said she, and hers was like the syrup of flowers. I shook my head. I was savage, sir. "The ladder's carried away." "I cast it off," said she with a smile. "Then," said I, "you must have come while I was asleep." Another thought came on me heavy as a ton of lead. "And where's he?" said I. "Where's the boat?" "He's drowned," said she, "as easy as that. And I let the boat go adrift. You wouldn't hear me when I called." "But look here," said I. "If you came through the storeroom, why didn't you wake me up? Tell me that. It sounds foolish enough, me standing like a lawyer in court, trying to prove she couldn't be there." She didn't answer for a moment. I guess she sighed, though I couldn't hear for the gale, and her eyes grew soft, sir, so soft. "I couldn't," said she. "You looked so peaceful, dear one." My cheeks and neck went hot, sir, as if a warm iron was laid on them. I didn't know what to say. I began to stammer. What do you mean?" But she was going back down the stair, out of sight. My God, sir, and I used to not think she was good-looking. I started to follow her. I wanted to know what she meant. Then I said to myself, if I don't go, if I wait here, she'll come back. And I went to the weather side, and I stood looking out of the window. Not that there was much to see. It was growing dark, and the 7 brothers looked like the mane of a running horse, a great, vast white horse running into the wind. The air was a welter with it. I caught one peep of a fisherman lying down flat trying to weather the ledge, and I said, God help them all tonight. And then I went hot at sound of that. God. I was right about her, though. She was back again. I wanted her to speak first before I turned, but she wouldn't. I didn't hear her go out. I didn't know what she was up to till I saw her coming outside the walk-around, drenched wet already. I pounded on the glass for her to come in and not be a fool, but if she heard me, she gave no sign of it. There she stood, and there I stood watching her. Lord, sir, was it just that I'd never had eyes to see? Or are there women who bloom? Her clothes were shining on her like a carving, and her hair was let down like a golden curtain tossing and streaming in the gale, and there she stood with her lips half open, drinking, and her eyes half closed, gazing straight away over the 7 brothers, and her shoulders swaying as if in tune with the wind and water and all the ruin. And when I looked at her hands over the rails, sir, they were moving in each other as if they bathed, and then I remembered, sir. A cold horror took me. I knew now why she had come back again. She wasn't a woman. She was a devil. I turned my back on her. I said to myself, it's time to light up. You've got to light up, like that, over and over, out loud. My hand was shivering so I could hardly find a match, and when I scratched it only flared a second and then went out at the backdraft from the open door. She was standing in the doorway, looking at me. It's queer, sir, but I felt like a child caught in mischief. I was going to light up, I managed to say, finally. Why? Said she. No, I can't say it as she did. Why? Said I. My God! She came nearer, laughing, as if with pity, low, you know. Your God? And who is your God? What is God? What is anything on a night like this? I drew back from her. All I could say anything about was the light. Why not the dark, said she. Dark is softer than light, tenderer, dearer than light. From the dark up here, away up here in the wind and the storm, we can watch the ships go by, you and I. And you love me so. You've loved me so long, Ray. I never have, I struck out at her. I don't. Her voice was lower than ever, but there was the same laughing pity in it. Oh, yes, you have. And she was near me again. I have? I yelled. I'll show you if I have. I got another match, sir, and scratched it on the brass. I gave it to the first wick, that little wick that's inside all the others. It bloomed like a yellow flower. I have? I yelled, and I gave it to the next. And then there was a shadow, and I saw she was kneeling beside me, her 2 elbows on the brass, and her 2 arms stretched out above the wicks, her bare forearms and wrists and hands. I gave a gasp. Take care! You'll burn them! For God's sake! She didn't move or speak. The match burnt my fingers and went out, and all I could do was stare at those arms of her, helpless. I'd never noticed her arms before. They were rounded and graceful and covered with soft down like a breath of gold. Then I heard her speaking close to my ear. Pretty arms, she said. Pretty arms. I turned. Her eyes were fixed on mine. They seemed heavy, as if with sleep, and yet between their lids there were 2 wells, deep, and as if they held all the things I'd ever thought or dreamed in them. I looked away from them at her lips. Her lips were red as poppies, heavy with redness. They moved, and I heard them speaking. Poor boy, you love me so, and you want to kiss me, don't you? No, said I, but I couldn't turn around. I looked at her hair. I'd always thought it was stringy hair. Some hair curls naturally with damp, they say, and perhaps that was it, for there were pearls of wet on it, and it was thick and shimmering around her face, making soft shadows by the temples. There was green in it, queer strands of green like braids. What is it? Said I. Nothing but weed, said she, with that slow, sleepy smile. Somehow or other, I felt calmer than I had any time. Look here, said I. I'm going to light this lamp. I took out a match, scratched it, and touched the 3rd wick. The flame ran round, bigger than the other 2 together, but still her arms hung there. I bit my lip. By God, I will, said I to myself, and I lit the 4th. It was fierce, sir, fierce, and yet those arms never trembled. I had to look around at her. Her eyes were still looking into mine, so deep, and her red lips were still smiling with that queer, sleepy droop. The only thing was that tears were raining down her cheeks, big, glowing, round, jeweled tears. It wasn't human, sir. It was like a dream. Pretty arms, she sighed. And then, as if those words had broken something in her heart, there came a great sob bursting from her lips. To hear it drove me mad. I reached to drag her away, but she was too quick, sir. She cringed from me and slipped down from between my hands. It was like she faded away and went down in a bundle, nursing her poor arms and mourning over them with these terrible, broken sobs. The sound of them took the manhood out of me. You would have been the same, sir. I knelt down beside her on the floor and covered my face. Please, I moaned. Please, please. That's all I could say. I wanted her to forgive me. I reached out a hand, blind for forgiveness, and I couldn't find her anywhere. I had hurt her so, and she was afraid of me, sir. Me, who loved her so deep it drove her crazy. I could see her down the stair, though it was dim and my eyes were filled with tears. I stumbled after her, crying, please, please. The little wicks I'd lit were blowing in the wind from the door and smoke on the glass behind them black. One went out.
I pleaded with them the same as I would plead with a human being. I said I'd be back in a second. I promised. And I went down the stair crying like a baby because I'd hurt her, and she was afraid of me, sir. She had gone into her room. The door was closed against me, and I could hear her sobbing beyond it, broken-hearted. My heart was broken, too. I beat on the door with my palms. I begged her to forgive me. I told her I loved her, and all the answer was that sobbing in the dark. And then I lifted the latch and went in, groping, pleading, "Dearest, please, because I love you." I heard her speak down near the floor. There wasn't any anger in her voice, nothing but sadness and despair. "No," said she. "You don't love me, Ray. You never have." "I do. I have." No, said she, as if she was tired out. "Where are you?" I was groping for her. I thought and lit a match. She had got to the door, and she was standing there as if ready to fly. I went toward her, and she made me stop. She took my breath away. "I hurt your arms," said I, in a dream. "No," said she, hardly moving her lips. She held them out to the match's light for me to look, and there was never a scar on 'em, not even that soft golden down was singed, sir. "You can't hurt my body," said she, sad as anything. "Only my heart, Ray, my poor heart." I tell you again, she took my breath away. I lit another match. "How can you be so beautiful?" I wondered. She answered in riddles, but oh, the sadness of her, sir. "Because," said she, "I've always wanted so to be." "How come your eyes so heavy?" said I. "Because I've seen so many things I never dreamed of," said she. "How come your hair so thick?" "It's the seaweed makes it thick," said she, smiling queer. "How come seaweed there?" "Out of the bottom of the sea." She talked in riddles, but it was like poetry to hear her, or a song. "How come your lips so red?" said I. "Because they've wanted so long to be kissed." Fire was on me, sir. I reached out to catch her, but she was gone, out of the door and down the stair. I followed, stumbling. I must have tripped on the turn, for I remember going through the air and fetching up with a crash, and I didn't know anything for a spell. How long, I can't say. When I came to, she was there somewhere, bending over me, croning, my love," under her breath like a song. But then when I got up, she was not where my arms went. She was down the stair again, just ahead of me. I followed her. I was tottering and dizzy and full of pain. I tried to catch up with her in the darkness of the storeroom, but she was too quick for me, sir, always a little too quick for me. Oh, she was cruel to me, sir. I kept bumping against things, hurting myself still worse, and it was cold and wet and a horrible noise all the while, and then, sir, I found the door was open and a sea had parted the hinges. I don't know how it all went, sir. I'd tell you if I could, but it's all so blurred. Sometimes it seems more like a dream. I couldn't find her anymore. I couldn't hear her. I went all over, everywhere. Once, I remember, I found myself hanging out of that door between the davits, looking down into that big black sea and crying like a baby. It's all riddles and blur. I can't seem to tell you much, sir. It was all, I don't know. I was talking to somebody else, not her. It was the inspector. I hardly knew it was the inspector. His face was as gray as a blanket, and his eyes were bloodshot, and his lips were twisted. His left wrist hung down, awkward. It was broken coming aboard the light in that sea. Yes, we were in the living room. Yes, sir, it was daylight, gray daylight. I tell you, sir, the man looked crazy to me. He was waving his goat arm toward the weather windows, and what he was saying over and over was this: "Look what you've done, damn you! Look what you've done!" And what I was saying was this: "I've lost her." I didn't pay any attention to him, nor him to me. By and by he did, though. He stopped talking all of a sudden, and his eyes looked like the devil's eyes. He put them up close to mine. He grabbed my arm with his good hand, and I cried. I was so weak. "Johnson," said he, Is that it? By the living God, if you got a woman out here, Johnson." "No," said I. "I've lost her." "What do you mean, lost her?" "It was dark," said I, "and it's funny how my head was clearing up. And the door was open, the storeroom door, and I was after her, and I guess she stumbled maybe, and I lost her." "Johnson," said he, "what do you mean? You sound crazy, downright crazy. Who?" "Her," I said. "Fedderson's wife." "Who?" "Her," said I. And with that he gave my arm another jerk. "Listen," said he, like a tiger. "Don't try that on me. It won't do any good. That kind of lies, not where you're going to. Fedderson and his wife, too, both of 'em drowned deader'n a doornail." "I know," said I, nodding my head. I was so calm it made him wild. "You're crazy. Crazy as a loon, Johnson." And he was chewing his lip red. "I know, because it was me that found the old man lying on Blackwater Flats yesterday morning. Me. And she'd been with him in that boat, too, because he had a piece of her jacket tore off, tangled in his arm." "I know," said I, nodding again like that. "You know what, you crazy murdering fool?" Those were his words to me, sir. "I know," said I, "what I know." "And I know," said he, "what I know." And there you are, sir. He's Inspector. I'm nobody. The Dead Man's Story by James Hain Friswell. On a dreary night in December, 3 gentlemen were seated in a painter's studio. The night was intensely dark and cold, and a slight hail beat against the window with a monotonous and ceaseless noise. The studio was immense and gloomy, the sole light within it proceeding from a stove around which the 3 were seated. Although they were bold, and of the age when men are most jovial, the conversation had taken, in spite of their efforts to the contrary, a reflection from the dull weather without, and their jokes and frivolity were soon exhausted. In addition to the light which issued from the crannies of the stove, there was another emitted from a bowl of spirits, which was ceaselessly stirred by one of the young men as he poured from an antique silver ladle some of the flaming spirit into the quaint old glasses from which the students drank. The blue flame of the spirit lighted up in a wild and fantastic manner the surrounding objects in the room, so that the heads of old prophets, of satyrs, or Madonnas, clothed in the same ghastly hue, seemed to move and to dance along the walls like a fantastic procession of the dead, and the vast room, which in the daytime sparkled with the creations of genius, seemed now, in its alternate darkness and sulphuric light, to be peopled with its dreams. Each time also that the silver spoon agitated the liquid, strange shadows traced themselves along the walls, hideous and of fantastic form. Unearthly tints spread also upon the hangings of the studio, from the old bearded prophet of Michelangelo to those eccentric caricatures which the artist had scrawled upon his walls, and which resembled an army of demons that one sees in a dream, or such as Goya has painted, whilst the lull and rise of the tempest without but added to the fantastic and nervous feeling which pervaded those within. Besides this, to add to the terror which was creeping over the 3 occupants of the room, each time that they looked at each other, they appeared with faces of a blue tone, with eyes fixed and glittering like live embers, and with pale lips and sunken cheeks. But the most fearful object of all was that of a plaster mask taken from the face of an intimate friend but lately dead, which, hanging near the window, let the light from the spirit fall upon its face, turned 3 parts towards them, which gave it a strange, vivid, and mocking expression. All people have felt the influence of large and dark rooms, such as Hoffmann has portrayed and Rembrandt has painted,
and all the world has experienced those wild and unaccountable terrors, panics without a cause, which seize on one like a spontaneous fever at the sight of objects to which a stray glimpse of the moon or a feeble ray from a lamp give a mysterious form. Nay, all, we should imagine, have at some period of their lives found themselves by the side of a friend in a dark and dismal chamber, listening to some wild story which so enchains them that although the mere lighting of a candle could put an end to their terror, they would not do so. So much need has the human heart of emotions, whether they be true or false. So it was upon the evening mentioned. The conversation of the three companions never took a direct line, but followed all the phases of their thoughts. Sometimes it was as light as the smoke which curled from their cigars, then for a moment fantastic as the flame of the burning spirit, and then again dark, lurid, and somber as the smile which lit up the mask from their dead friend's face. At last the conversation ceased altogether, and the respiration of the smokers was the only sound heard, and their cigars glowed in the dark like will-o'-the-wisps brooding o'er a stagnant pool. It was evident to them all that the first who should break the silence, even if he spoke in jest, would cause in the hearts of the others a start and tremor, for each felt that he had almost unwittingly plunged into a ghastly reverie.
"Henry," at last said one, again dipping the spoon into the flaming spirit, "hast thou read Hoffman?"
"I should think so," said Harry.
"What think you of him?"
"Why, that he writes admirably, and moreover, what is more admirable, in such a manner that you see at once he almost believes that which he relates. As for me, I know very well that when I read him of a dark night, I am obliged to creep to bed without shutting my book, and without daring to look behind me."
"Indeed, then, you love the terrible and fantastic?"
"I do," said Henry.
"And what do you think of such romances?" asked the questioner, addressing the third.
"I like them much," was the answer.
"Good. Then I will tell you a strange story which happened to myself."
"I presumed as much," said Henry.
"An adventure in which you are the hero?" asked the third. "Yes, I myself. I must again, before I commence, assure you that I am the hero of this strange adventure."
"Go on, then. We will listen."
The silver spoon fell from his fingers into the bowl. The flame of the spirit, not enlivened by agitation, faded out little by little, and in a few moments they were in almost complete darkness, a warm light only being thrown upon their legs by the fire in the stove. He began his story. One midwinter evening, it might be about a year ago, the weather was just as it is now. The same cold, the same sleet and hail, the same dullness. You know my profession is that of a surgeon, and on that day I had a great many cases to attend, so that after having made my last visit, instead of going, as I sometimes did, to the theatre, I made haste home. I then dwelt in one of the most deserted streets of the Faubourg Saint-Germain. I was very tired, and I quickly got to bed. I extinguished the lamp and amused myself with gazing at my fire, watching the great shadows which each little flame made dance upon my bed curtains. Then at last my eyes shut, and I fell asleep. It might have been an hour after I first closed my eyes when I felt some person shaking me roughly. I awoke with a start, and not in the very best temper, and stared with some surprise at my nocturnal visitor. It was my manservant. "Sir," said he, "rise at once. You are sent for to a young lady who is dying."
"Where does she live?" said I.
"Nearly opposite, but there is a messenger downstairs who will take you to her." I rose, and thinking that at such a moment my toilette was of little consequence, dressed myself in haste. I took my instrument case and followed the man who had come for me. It rained in torrents. Happily, however, I had only the street to cross, and I was almost immediately at the house of the person who required my assistance. She dwelt in a large and aristocratic hotel. I had to cross a wide courtyard and to ascend a stone staircase which ran up outside the building. Then, passing a vestibule wherein some servants were waiting to show me upstairs, I was at once conducted to the chamber of the sick lady.
It was a very large room, furnished throughout with oaken furniture, very ancient and beautifully carved. A maidservant showed me into the chamber and then left me. I went at once to the bedside, carved like the rest of the furniture, with tall pillars running up to some height, supporting a canopy of rich arras, and upon which, pressing a snowy pillow, lay a head more ravishing than ever Raphael dreamed of when he painted his finest Madonna. Locks, bright and golden as a wave of Pactolus, floated around her face. Her eyes were nearly closed, and her mouth partly open, discovering a row of teeth beautifully even and as white as pearls. Her neck surpassed the lily in whiteness, and when I took her hand I saw so fine an arm that it recalled to me those which Homer has assigned to Juno. I remained there, forgetful of the cause for which I came, gazing at her and recalling nothing like her in my recollections or my dreams, when she turned toward me and, opening her large blue eyes, said to me, "I suffer much." Still there was, I found, little the matter with her. I took my lancet, but at the moment of touching an arm so beautiful and white, my hand trembled. However, the feelings of the doctor triumphed over those of the man. I opened a vein. There came from her blood pure and bright as melted coral. She fainted. I did not wish to quit her. I remained with her. I felt a secret happiness in holding, as it were, the life of so beautiful a being in my hands. I staunched the blood. She opened her eyes by degrees, carried the hand she had free to her bosom, turned toward me, and fixed upon me a grateful look. "Thank you," she said. "I suffer less." She had about her such beauty that I felt rooted to my place, counting each pulsation of my heart against the throb of her pulse, listening to her respiration, which each time grew less feverish, and thinking to myself that if ever there existed a heaven upon earth, it must be in the love of such a woman as I saw before me. She slept. I remained, almost kneeling by the side of her bed. A lamp of alabaster suspended from the ceiling threw its golden light upon all the room. The woman who had come with me had gone away to announce that her mistress was better and had no further need of any of the servants. I was alone, and there she lay, calm and beautiful as an angel who has fallen asleep in the midst of a prayer. As for me, I was madly in love. However, I felt that I could no longer remain there. I retired, therefore, without making a noise, so as not to waken her. I ordered some little things to be given her when she woke, and I left word that I would return the next day. When I reached my home, I could no longer sleep. I lay awake, thinking of her. I felt that the love of such a woman would be an eternal enchantment made up of reverie and delight. With these thoughts of her, I passed away the night, and when the day came, I was still madly in love. Madly! I was a maniac. However, after these follies of a night so agitated, came morning's reflections. I remembered that an unfathomable abyss separated me from the loved object, that she was too beautiful not to have long had someone who loved and would be united to her, that she would love him so tenderly, so devotedly, that she could not forget or be faithless to him. So I set myself to hate him without knowing who he was, this man to whom I thought, in my mad way, that Providence had given in this world such exquisite felicity that he could submit to suffer in the next an eternity of pain without a murmur. I waited impatiently the hour when I could again visit her. Each moment seemed an age, but at last the time came, and I set forth. When I arrived, I was shown into a boudoir furnished with the most exquisite taste, and altogether with a lavish luxury which was shown in every article of furniture. She was alone, reading. A large robe of black velvet covered her from head to foot so completely that, like one of Perugino's angels, only her face and hands could be seen. She held coquettishly in a scarf the arm from which I had bled her, and was holding to the fire her two pretty little feet, which did not seem formed for our earth, and there she sat, looking so pure and beautiful that I thought her an ideal of one of the angels. She held out her hand and bade me sit down beside her. "So soon up, madam," said I. "You are surely imprudent." "No," she said. "I'm quite strong." She smiled sweetly as she said it. "Besides, I have slept well, and am, moreover, not very ill." "You said, however, that you suffered." "More in mind than in body," said she with a sigh. "You are sad, madam." "Oh, deeply so," she returned. "But happily, Providence is also a physician, and has found for grief a universal panacea, forgetfulness."
"But," said I, "there are some griefs which kill."
"True," she said. "But the grave and forgetfulness, are they not the same? One is the tomb of the body, the other that of the heart. There is no other difference."
"But you, madam, how can you suffer grief? You are too high to be touched by it. Sorrow should pass beneath you like clouds pass under the feet of angels. To us come storms and lightning, to you the blue serenity of heaven."
"Ah," she said, "'tis there you deceive yourself. There all of your science ends. Your knowledge does not reach the heart."
"Well," said I, "try at least, madam, to forget. God sometimes permits a joy to succeed grief, and a smile to follow on our tears, and 'tis also true that when the heart of one he tries is too wide to refill of itself, and when the wound is too deep to heal without succor, he sends across the path of such a one a soul which can comprehend and know it. For he knows that we suffer less in suffering together, and that a moment must come when the desolate heart must leap again with joy, and when the deadly wound must heal."
"And what is the prescription, doctor," said she, "by which you would heal such a wound?"
"That must be according to the patient," I returned. "To some I should counsel faith, to others love."
"You are right," she answered. "They are the two sisters of charity who visit the soul."
Then ensued a long silence, during which I fixed my eyes upon that sweet countenance on which the light which peeped through the silken curtains cast such a charming tint, upon the beautiful tresses which now no longer floated over her face like a veil, but which were banded on her temples and were drawn behind her ears. The conversation had taken from the beginning a sad cast, but by this the beautiful being before me seemed more radiant than before, diademed as she was with the triple crown of beauty, love, and grief. Thus I remained gazing at her, not so mad as I was on the first evening, but the more collected by her quietude. If that moment had made her mine, I should have fallen at her feet, I should have taken her hands, I should have wept with her as a sister, and whilst I reverenced her as an angel, I should have consoled her as a woman. But I was yet ignorant what grief it was which she should forget, or what had caused the deep wound still unhealed. And this was what I had to find out, for between the physician and the patient there was not as yet sufficient confidence for her to own her sorrow, although there had been enough for her to confess the cause. Nothing, however, that I could divine gave me the clue. No one had called at the hotel to inquire for her. None appeared to trouble themselves as lovers would about her. Her grief, then, must lay in the past, and must be reflected alone in the present.
"Doctor," said she to me, suddenly awakening from her reverie, "can I soon dance?"
"Yes, madam," I answered, astonished at the question.
"Because you must know that I must give a ball which I have promised for some long time. You must come, will you not? You will have very little opinion of my illness, which, making me dream all day, does not hinder me from dancing all night. My grief, however, is one of those which must be concealed in the depths of one's heart, so that the world may learn nothing. There are tortures which must be masked with a smile, lest anyone should guess them. Mine I wish to keep to myself as closely as some would conceal a hidden joy. The world around me envies me as beautiful and happy. It is a deception of which I do not wish to rob them. This is why I appear gay and dance. Surely do I weep on the morrow, but I weep alone." As she said these words, she threw upon me a glance inexpressibly sweet and confiding, and added, "You will come. Come soon, will you not?" I carried her hand to my lips, and I retired. When I got home, I seemed in a dream. My windows looked upon hers. I remained all the day looking at them, and all the day they were closed and dark. I forgot everything for this woman. I slept not. I ate nothing. That evening I fell into a fever. The next morning I was delirious, and the next evening I was dead.
Dead?
Cried his hearers. Dead, answered the narrator, with a conviction in his voice which words alone cannot give. Dead as Fabian, the cast of whose dead face hangs from that wall. Go on, whispered the others, holding their breath. The hail still rattled against the windows, and the fire had so nearly died out that they threw more wood on the feeble flame which penetrated the darkness of the studio and cast a faint light upon the pale face of him who told the story. He resumed. From that moment I felt nothing but a numbing chill and a slight but still freezing motion. The latter was doubtless that of being put into the grave. I had been buried for some time, I do not exactly know how long, for there is no timekeeping in the grave, when I heard someone calling my name. I shook with cold and fear without being able to answer. After a lapse of some moments, I was again called. I made an effort to speak, and then felt the bandage which wrapped me from head to foot. It was my shroud. At last I managed feebly to articulate, "Who calls?" "'Tis I," said a voice. "Who art thou?" I, was the answer, and the voice grew weaker, as if it was lost in the distance, or as if it was but the icy rustle of the trees. A third time my name sounded on my ears, but now it seemed to run from tree to tree, as if it whistled in each dead branch, so that the entire cemetery repeated it with a dull sound. Then I heard a noise of wings, as if my name, pronounced in the silence, had suddenly awakened a troop of night birds. My hands, as if by some mysterious power, sought my face. In silence I undid the shroud which bound me and tried to see. It seemed as if I had awakened from a long sleep. I was cold. I then recalled the dread fear which oppressed me and the mournful images by which I was surrounded. The trees had no longer any leaves upon them and seemed to stretch forth their bare branches like huge specters. A single ray of moonlight which shone forth showed me a long row of tombs forming a horizon around me and seeming like the steps which might lead to heaven. All the vague voices of the night which seemed to preside at my awakening were full of terror. I turned my head and sought for him who called me. He was seated at my side, watching me, his head leaning on his hands, and his face pregnant with a terrible look and clothed with a horrible smile. Fear ran like an electric shock through me. "Who art thou?" said I, with an endeavor to gather up all my strength. "And why dost thou awaken me?" "To render you a service," he answered. "Where am I?" "In the graveyard." "Who art thou?" "A friend." "Leave me to my sleep," said I. "Listen," cried he to me. "Dost thou remember aught of the earth?" "No." "Dost thou regret anything?" "No." "How long hast thou been asleep?" "I know not." "I will tell you," he said. "Thou hast been dead 2 days, and the last word you uttered was the name of a woman instead of that of the Lord. Therefore, if Satan wished to possess it, your soul belongs to him. Dost understand me?" "Yes," I answered. "And dost thou wish to live?" Who art thou who offerest me life? Art thou Satan?" "Satan or not," was the answer, "will you live?" "Alone?" "No. You shall see her." "When?" "This very night, and at her own house." "I accept it," I cried, trying to rise. "What are thy conditions?" "I make none," said the speaker with a lurid smile. "Do you believe that, from time to time, I'm not capable of doing good? This very night she gives a ball. I will take you thither. Let us set out." "Good," cried Satan. He held forth his hand and dragged me from the place. You may imagine that what I say was impossible. All that I say is that I felt a penetrating cold which froze all my limbs. "Now," cried the fiend, "follow me. You must understand that I cannot go out by the great gate. The porter will not suffer that. Once here, there is no retreat. Follow me, therefore. We'll just go to your house, where you shall dress yourself, for you can hardly go to a ball in your present costume, especially as it is not a bal masqué. Mind and wrap yourself well up in your winding sheet, for the nights are cold, and you may feel unpleasantly touched by it." As he said this, Satan laughed malignantly, and I continued silently to walk after him. "I am sure," continued he, "that, in spite of the service I am doing you, you do not yet like me. You are always thus, you men, ungrateful to your friends. Not that I blame ingratitude, it is a vice upon which I pride myself, since I invented it myself, and I must say that it is one most in vogue. But I do wish to see you a little more merry. It is the only thing I ask of you." I answered not, but still followed my guide, white as a statue and as cold. I was silent, but at the pauses in the fiend's voice I could hear my teeth chatter against each other and my bones rattle in my body. "Shall we soon arrive?" said I, with effort. "Still impatient," said my guide sardonically. "You must think her very beautiful?" "As an angel!" I cried. "Ah, my friend," said he with a laugh, "one must confess that you have a want of delicacy in your answers. How can you talk to me of angels, knowing I have been one? In fact, I have done for you today somewhat more than an angel could have done. I excuse you, however. One must excuse a good deal to a man who has been dead upwards of 2 days. Besides, I am, as I have told you, very good-tempered today. There has happened in the world a few things which please me very much. I did think that men were degenerate. I absolutely fancied that they were getting virtuous. But no, they are always the same, just the same as when first created. Well, today has been a rare day for me. I have seldom found things succeed so well as today. I have counted since yesterday evening 622 suicides in France alone. Among them there has, however, been more young men than old fellows, which is a pity because they die without children and are therefore lost to me, but 2,443 in the whole of Europe. The other parts of the world I don't count. There I am like rich capitalists who cannot count their gains. 1,200 judges who have given false judgment. Ordinarily I have more than this latter number. There are also 27 cases of atheism, cases which give me greater pleasure than all the rest put together. With these and all the others, you will find that they make together a rough aggregate of nearly 3 million souls in Europe alone. I haven't reckoned petty crimes such as theft, forgery, etc. These are merely the farthings in the gross account, so you can easily calculate in what space of time the whole world will fall into my hands at 3 million souls per day. I really fancy that I shall be obliged to enlarge my place of accommodation." "I understand your triumph," I muttered to myself as I hastened onwards. "Indeed," said Satan with a somber and melancholy air. "Do you fear me then, since you see me face to face? Am I so repulsive? Let us reason a little. What would become of your world without me? It would die of spleen. It is I who invented gold gambling. 'Tis I, love. Business, 'tis I. Thinking of these things, I cannot for the life of me understand the spite which you men seem to bear against me. Your poets, for instance, who keep talking of an ideal love, cannot understand that in raving of the love which exalts, they point out the way to that which debases, that in seeking a Diana, they manage to find an Aphrodite. Now, look, for instance, to yourself. You have just arisen from the dead. You are yet as cold as a corpse, and yet you seek the embraces of love. You see, evil survives death.
and that a man who has lived a wicked life would, if he were put to the proof, prefer an eternity of his own passions to an eternity of pure and heavenly happiness. I interrupted him with, "Shall we soon get there?" For the horizon seemed to grow lighter every moment, and yet still we didn't seem to advance an inch. "How impatient you are!" ejaculated the fiend querulously. "You must know that over the great gate of the cemetery there is a cross, and that cross is a kind of barrier or custom house to me. As I generally travel about for purposes which the cross forbids, I should be obliged to make the sign of it upon my forehead to pass it. Now, I am willing enough to carry on my own little peccadilloes, but the fiend himself revolts at sacrilege. So, as I've told you before, we can't pass there. But never mind that, follow me. I've promised to conduct you to a ball, and I will keep my word. My word," added he sardonically, "is well known to be as good as my bond." There was, in all this irony of the fiend, something so fatal, cold, and devilish that almost each word which dropped from his mouth seemed to freeze me. Still, what I tell you I heard with these ears, I couldn't drag myself away from my strange companion. We continued to walk for some 100 feet when we came to a wall, before which an accumulation of tombstones formed a kind of flight of steps. Satan placed his foot upon the first, and, without any remorse, strode upon the sacred memorials till he reached the top of the wall. I hesitated. I was afraid to follow him, but he held out his hand to me, saying, "There is not the slightest danger. You can step upon these paving stones. They are those of some acquaintances of mine." When I had reached the place where he stood, he suddenly asked me whether he should show me the town, but I answered, No, let us move forward." We therefore leapt down from the wall upon the ground. The moon seemed to veil herself before the bold looks of Satan. The night was cold. All the doors were closed, all the windows darkened, and the streets deserted. From their appearance, one would have imagined that, for a long time past, no foot had traversed these silent streets. Everything around us bore a death-like aspect. It seemed as if, when day came, no one would open their doors, that no head of woman or of child would look out of those dark, dull windows, that no step would break the silence which fell like a pall upon all around. I seemed to be walking in a city which had been buried some ages. In truth, the town seemed to have been depopulated, and the cemetery to have grown full. Still, we went forward, without hearing a murmur or meeting even with a shadow. The street stretched for a long way across this fearful city of silence and repose. At last, we reached my house. "You remember it?" said the fiend. "Yes," replied I sullenly. "Let us enter." "First," said he, "we must open the door. It is I, by the way, who invented the science of opening doors without breaking them in. In fact, I have a second key to all doors and gates, with one exception, that of paradise." We entered. The calm without continued within. It was horrible. I felt as in a dream. I did not breathe nor move. Imagine, if you can, yourselves entering your chambers after having been dead for 2 days, finding everything in the same position in which it was during your illness, but wrapped in that dark gloom which death alone can give, and seeing all the objects arranged never again to be disturbed by you. The only thing which seemed to have any motion in it which I had seen since I arose from the tomb was a large clock, by the side of which a human being had ceased to exist, and which now ticked slowly on, counting the hours of my eternity as it had the minutes of my life. I went to the mantel shelf. I lighted a wax candle to assure myself of the existence of everything, for all which surrounded me appeared so strange that I could not believe my senses. Every object was real. I saw before me the portrait of my mother, with the same smile upon her lips, smiling on me now in death as it had before in life. I opened the books which I had read only some few days before my death. Everything was the same. The only alteration was that the linen had been removed from the bed,
and that on each chest and drawer there was a seal. As for Satan, he was sitting down upon the tester of the bed, reading attentively the lives of the saints. I passed before a cheval glass, and I saw myself from head to foot in my strange costume, wrapped in my winding sheet, my face pale, my eyes heavy and dull. I began to doubt this life which an unknown power had returned to me. I placed my hand upon my heart. It did not beat. I carried my hand to my brow. My brow was as cold as ice, so also was my chest. My pulse was, of course, as motionless as my heart. However, memory lived within me, and I could move about. The thought was horrible. My eyes and my brain were alone really alive. What was yet more horrible was that I could not detach my eyes from the glass, which gave back my figure, cold, pale, and frozen. Each movement of my lips was reflected by a ghastly and sinister smile. I could not quit my place, and I had no power to cry out. The timepiece gave out that dull sound which warns us that it will soon strike. Then it struck 2 o'clock. A few seconds after, the neighboring church clock struck also, then another, and all was again silent. By the reflection of the glass, I saw that the fiend had fallen comfortably to sleep over the volume he had tried to read. I turned round and caught my reflection in another glass with that pale clearness which a single wax candle in a vast chamber gives. I seemed haunted by myself. Fear reached its culminating point, and I cried out loud. Satan awoke. "Look," said he, not regarding my fear, "how you men try to instill virtue into others. Here is this book, absolutely so nonsensical and dull that I, who have not been to sleep for nearly 6,000 years, am obliged to take a nap over it. How is this? Are you not yet ready?" "Look at me," said I, mechanically. Come," answered my companion. "Break the seals, take your clothes and plenty of gold. Tomorrow, when it's found out, justice will step in and condemn some poor devil for the robbery, and," continued he, condescending for a moment to be vulgar, for the devil is always a gentleman, "that will be a little bit of fat for me." I dressed myself in haste, but noticed every time I touched my forehead or my bosom that they were still cold as ice. When ready, I looked at Satan. "Shall we see her?" said I. "In 5 minutes." "And tomorrow, what then?" "Tomorrow," said he, "you may take yourself to your ordinary pursuits and to your common life. I don't do things by halves." "Without conditions?" "Without any." "Let us set out then," I returned. We did so, and in a few minutes we were before the house at which I had called some few days previously. "Let us go upstairs," said my conductor. He did so. I recognized the grand staircase, the vestibule, the antechamber. The entrance of the saloon was crowded with people. The party was brilliant. The room seemed to glitter, as it were, with light, flowers, jewels, and beautiful women. When we entered, they were dancing. I cannot tell how I felt seeing all these things, and with yet the presence of the grave about me. I took Satan aside and whispered to him, "Where is she?" "In her boudoir," he answered. I waited till the dance was finished. I then crossed the saloon. The huge mirrors, by the light of the chandeliers, reflected my pale and somber figure, and I recognized that death-like smile which had so frozen me. But here, at least, I was safe. Here was no solitude, but a crowd of joyous people, no cemetery, but a ballroom, no tomb, but beauty, ravishing beauty. For one moment, dreaming of her for whom I came, I forgot whence I came. Arrived at the door of the boudoir, I glanced in and saw her. There she sat, more beautiful than beauty's self, chaste as a statue of Diana. I stopped for an instant in ecstasy. She was clothed in a dress of dazzling whiteness, with bare arms and shoulders. I thought I saw upon one of her arms the little red point where I had bled her. Perhaps, however, this was more fancy than anything else. When I appeared, she was surrounded by handsome young men, to whose vapid talk she did not, however, seem to listen. Raising her beautiful eyes mechanically, she saw me, seemed to hesitate for a moment, and then, with a sweet smile, she quitted the rest and came to me. "You see," said she, "I am quite strong." As she said this, the orchestra again struck up. She continued, "And you can make proof of it if you wish. Let us waltz together." She then added some words to someone at her side. I looked toward him. It was Satan. "You have kept your word," said I. "I thank you for it, but this woman must become mine this very night." "Thou shalt have her," he said coldly, "but wipe your face before you dance. There's a worm crawling upon your cheek." So saying, he departed, leaving me more cold and ghastly than before. To restore my feelings, I pressed the arm of her for whom I had come from the grave, and thus I entered the ballroom with her. It was one of those delicious, entrancing waltzes where all those who surround us seem to disappear, and we see none but ourselves. So we waltzed with our eyes fixed on each other till they seemed to make a language of their own. Hers seemed to say, "I am young and beautiful, and to him who possesses me all the beauties of my heart and soul will be revealed." Still the waltz went on. The measure ceased at last, and we were alone. She leaned upon my arm and turned her fine eyes upon me with a look which seemed to say, "I love you." I led her back into the saloon. It was deserted. She sat down, reclining on an ottoman, and turned her eyes to me, half closed, as if with love rather than fatigue. I leaned toward her. "Ah," said I, "if you only knew how I love you." "I know it," she answered. "I love you equally as well." "I would give my soul," said I earnestly, "to possess you as my bride." The eyes of the lady lit up with a fire which resembled those of the fiend. Their light seemed to enter into my soul. "Listen," she said anxiously. "In a few moments we shall be alone. That door leads to my chamber. Wait till all are gone, and we will ratify the compact." The door opened silently, then shut upon me. I was alone in the chamber where first I had seen her. There was some mysterious perfume which one cannot describe. I glanced in the mirror. I was still as pale as ever. I heard the carriages which took up the guests and departed one by one until the last had disappeared, and the silence again became dreadful and mournful. I felt, little by little, step by step, my terrors return upon me. I dared not recall my former thoughts. I was astonished that my mistress never came. I counted the minutes till they seemed hours. I sat down and rested my elbows on my knees. Then I began to think of my mother, who at that moment was weeping for me. My mother, to whom I had been all in life, to whom, alas, I had given but little, too little thought. Then came back the days of my childhood. I remembered that I had never had a moment's grief but that my mother had consoled it, and now, perhaps, when I was about to prepare for a crime, she was passing a vigil of tears and prayers in remembrance of me. The thought was fearful. I felt full of remorse. Tears came into my eyes. I rose and looked at myself again in the glass. My eyes, before dull, seemed to brighten with resolution. I prayed within myself and determined to rush from the present danger. I saw behind me a pale and motionless figure. It was my mistress. She had just entered the room. I rushed past her, through the half-opened door, and before I thought of anything else, I regained my own home. In the sanctity of that, I remained in meditation and prayer. I was safe from the intrusion of the fiend who tempted me. Not so, however, were my thoughts. In the morning, which slowly dawned, the beauty to which I had so blindly bowed myself seemed to have regained its power. I forgot my good resolutions. I threw behind me my prayers. I again gave up to the passions which devoured me. I determined again to seek her. It was broad daylight when I went out of my room, but by the doorpost a figure, formed, it seemed to me, of a dark vapor, stood and looked at me sardonically. I felt that it was the fiend, and I knew his power over me, and that he followed upon my steps. The day was dark, dull, and cold. I walked carelessly, and, heedless of anything but the purpose I had before me, I at last arrived. At the moment I placed my foot upon the step, I saw an old man, pale and feeble, who was about to descend the flight of stairs which ran up to the door. "Who do you want, sir?" said the porter. "Madame P," I replied. "Madame P?" returned he, with a look of astonishment, pointing out the old man at the same time. "That gentleman now inhabits this hotel. Madame P died 3 months ago." I gave a loud cry and fell forward senseless. A silence fell upon the party who listened to this strange story. None dared for a few moments to break it. At last one asked, "What further happened?" No one answered, and when they looked through the increasing gloom of the studio, they found that the narrator of the strange story had departed, none knew how or when, nor did either of us ever again meet with the hero of the dead man's story.